Okay, so we'll reconvene the meeting from closed session to open session. I will ask any members of council to bring forward their disclosures of interest, and I believe Councillor Follis has a disclosure of interest.
Thanks. Through the chair, I'm bringing forward a disclosure of personal interest in regards to closed session item number 1. The connection is I have family friends that live on Victoria Point that have a direct connection to the road allowance. I have checked with the Integrity Commissioner and they have instructed that I continue to deliberate on this matter. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll be also moving an item from closed session to departmental reports, which will be item number 1, Re-Economic Development Department, Legal Matters, Forest Avenue South encroachments. Okay, and that motion moved by Councillor Eamon, second by Councillor Campbell. All those in favor?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, you actually don't need to do that motion because you did so, it was a procedural motion and you did so in closed. So if we, next step would be to move on to the next item.
Okay. So I'll move on to motions arising from closed session. I have a motion moved by Councillor Eamon, second by Councillor Sapola, that this committee recommends to council that is recommended in confidential report ESO-19-11 dated September 24th, 2019 from the Environmental Services and Operations Department, Stewart Eston LLP be retained to defend the city against an application from Rexton Developments, and that $40,000 for the cost of legal fees to address the Rexton Developments limited legal matters be approved from the wastewater reserve. Any discussion? All those in favor? Great, thank you. And I'll read the next motion from closed session, moved by Councillor Campbell, second by Councillor Heen, that this committee recommends to council that is recommended in confidential report SEL-19-04 dated September 12th, 2019 from the boards and committee selection panel, Ellen Cohen be appointed to the Commander of Awards Committee to replace Robert Ted Duncan, who has recently resigned for a term expiring November 14th, 2022. And that Gail McCorkle be appointed to the Orillia Public Library Board to replace Lisa Avery, who has recently resigned for the remainder of the term to expire November 14th, 2022. And that Olena Trikloska be appointed to the Orillia Public Library Board to replace Elizabeth Hutt, who recently resigned for the remainder of the term to expire November 14th, 2022. And that Jamie Mask be appointed to the Parking Advisory Committee as a citizen-at-large representative for a term to expire November 14th, 2022. And that Leanne Davis be appointed to the Transit Advisory Committee to replace Terrence Gohl, who has recently resigned for the remainder of the term to expire November 14th, 2021. Any discussion? Councillor Raymond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before I make a comment on this, I would like to point out that I'm not shrinking as I get older, but my chair is stuck in the bottom position. However, I would like to address this this matter. You may think it's a song that I have spoken to on many occasions, but it's one of my most favorite songs coming forward to this council, and that is to not only thank these individuals for putting their names forward to assist our city in its as we grow and develop, become an even better place to work, but all of those other individuals who also have put their names forward, and though not successful potentially in this particular round, I know that staff have asked whether you'd like to have your name continue, and many of you have. As we progress over the remainder of the term, we look forward to the opportunity of bringing you into the fold and assisting our city. So a great thank you from all of us on council for that, for all of you.
Okay, any other discussion from members of council? Okay, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I also have a motion moved by, the next motion moved by Councillor Lauer, seconded by Councillor. Moved by Councillor Lauer, seconded by Councillor Campbell, that recommendation set out in the September 30th, 2000 consent agenda be adopted by Council Committee and forward to Council for ratification with the exception of items 2, which shall be introduced separately. So we'll just announce item 2. Okay. Okay. Call the question. Is there any discussion? Councillor Cipolla?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item number 3, the alcohol in gaming restricts 2 drinks per person at any one time. How's the 4 tickets affect it? Do we have the authority to do this?
Just wait for staff.
I mean, I agree with it, but I just want to know if we have the authority through the alcohol and gaming to be able to do that, because my recollection says it's 2 drinks. I don't know.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Ward.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The municipal alcohol policy is currently open to how many you can cash in at a time when it's tickets, but only serving 2 at a time. Mariposa Folk Festival has requested that it is causing excessive lineups, and to increase their process there and stop the lineups, could they sell an unlimited amount but only cash in 4 at a time?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, that doesn't contravene the Alcohol and Gaming Act.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it does not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mayor Clark?
Thank you. Through you. Listen, I am in full support of this. I mean, I think it's important to control the flow of alcohol and the sale of alcohol, but the selling these tickets doesn't impact that particular aspect one way or another necessarily, because that control will be at the redemption of the tickets. So because this isn't to do with the redemption of the tickets, therefore the actual service of alcohol, I'm in full support. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, the next motion. Next motion moved by Councillor Follis, second by Councillor Ainsworth, that this committee recommends to council that further to report CD-19-15 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Clerk's Department, the 2020 council meeting schedule be adopted as set out in Schedule A of the report, with the exception that council committee and council meetings be indicated to begin at 7 p.m. and that Chapter 12 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code council committee procedure be amended to allow council committee meetings to occur at 7 p.m. Discussion, Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to encourage fellow members of council to support this motion moving forward. Historically, we passed a motion to move council committee for a trial period to 2 o'clock with the idea that we'd see how it goes. Well, for some of us, it hasn't been going too well. It's been quite stressful for those of us who are doing full-time jobs or other things out in the community. And it's created a lot of hardships and, accessibility in regards to coming to council. It created a lot of other personal issues for some folks that I won't get into. But it is something that's been tough, and we're hoping to remedy that in the future by moving both, keeping council where it is at 7 and then also moving council committee to 7 p.m. in the future. And I will just leave my comments at that for now and see what the rest of the table is thinking and then go from there.
Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Through the chair, I wanted to echo Councillor Ainsworth's sentiment. I know other councillors around the table as well. Councillor Heen prior had brought up the solution not the solution, kind of keeping it at 7 p.m. starts for both meetings. That's something that I agree with, and there's two reasons that are driving my decision to go back to the way we had it prior to this council. One is that it has hindered accessibility for both the public and council members that Councillor Ainsworth had spoken to. And I really wanted to stress the ability to do our jobs rest on an active effort to collect public input, and the 7 p.m. time slot for both council and council committee better ensures that more of the public has access to our meetings. The other one, I guess for the benefit of those watching at home, I thought I'd kind of give a little bit of insight into the back end of how councillors and council as a whole kind of operates. Is we usually get the council package that as is available to everyone, usually a Thursday or Friday, and it gives us maybe a day or two to read up, and then Mondays are really an important day to make sure that we've got all the clarity that we need to ask questions of staff prior to the meeting. And so having a meeting at 1 p.m., it hinders that ability to some extent to make sure all our questions are answered, but also, while we're asking those questions, sometimes staff are preparing for the meeting happening at 1 p.m. So it's been a bit more of a difficulty than as it was before, I've found. So I would certainly support Councillor Ainsworth's move this to a 7 p.m. start for both council and council committee. Thanks.
Councillor Eamon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not inclined to support this move. We all know when we put our names forward for this job that, and the fact that we are remunerated for this job, that we are committing to operate in whatever parameters the council of the day passes as the parameters of operation. And we acknowledged last year when we considered the move that the fact that going late, as we have experienced on some occasions, it's difficult to, after a day, to maintain our level of commitment and energy. So moving to the afternoon, particularly in these meetings when we have the opportunity to debate and deal with staff, is an advantage. We also acknowledge that, yes, there are people who have some difficulty in getting here during the day, but equally there's a number of people in our community who find evenings as difficult with family commitments and things of that nature. And it's surprising how many people in this community actually are employed in hours outside of the more traditional 9 to 5 hours. So all things said, my sense is that we have not received any outcry at all from the public on this. The sessions are captured by Rogers and played in the traditional time on Monday evenings for the literally hundreds of thousands of people across this nation who are watching the Orillia Council meetings on a regular basis. I get correspondence from my son in Vancouver often. To that I can't. But I think it's a progressive move. I think it's a move that brings us more in line with where councils across the province are going. The workload of being a councillor is increasing and is of greater demand, and I think we as councillors have the obligation to do that. I do acknowledge that for those who find the delivery on Thursday and the inability to get through the agenda and seek their questions in time to respond, which need to be in by noon on Monday regardless, I have some empathy for that, but I have carved out times on the weekend, unfortunately, for this purpose and not for the other purposes in my life. So I'm not inclined to support this at this point.
Councillor Hing?
Thank you, Councillor Kustra. I am in support of this motion. This was the way I wanted to go from the very beginning. I believe that there are people that would run for council knowing that there were evening meetings. And as many of you know, I have been on pounding the drums, trying to get more women on council. I think it's a travesty that we only have one woman on our council this time around. And I think that more women would be able to run for council. If the meetings were in the evenings. I'm thinking of childcare. I'm thinking of work time issues, and I think that we're most fortunate on this council that we have the diversity of age that we do have, but we want younger people on council. Many of them have full-time jobs, and we're not going to get that diversity on council if we're going to have afternoon meetings. I think it provides it's a hardship for our younger members to hold down a job and to try and work around the number of daytime meetings that we do have. When I figured it out, 15 council committee meetings equals 7 half days, or 7 full days of work that they would be taking off, which is probably half their holiday time. So they can probably work around doing the budget committee meetings and the strategic planning meetings and all of that sort of thing. But if you put that other 7 full days, there goes their full holiday time. And that can be very difficult. So what you're doing is you're saying, unless you own your own business or unless you're retired, you can't run for council. And is that the kind of council we want to have? We want to have a diversity of people on our council. We want to have more women on council, and we want to open up to as many people as we can. And for that reason, I would support moving it back to the evening meetings.
Councillor Lauer?
Oh, thank you, Councillor Kluster. I won't be supporting this. My objective is that council make the best decisions they possibly can. I believe that is done during the day. I think it becomes unrealistic if you're expecting people to be as effective 10 or 11 o'clock at night after also working a day. And I remind everybody I am employed. So I have, I have considerations during the day when I do these meetings that I have to make up at other times, whether it's on weekends or at night. And I also would just caution everybody from assuming that the people that do, as Councillor Riemann has mentioned, the people that do not work a traditional shift are not worth considering. I think there's a lot of people out there that have differing work schedules than the traditional 9 to 5. So when I took this job, I understood that I had to be flexible. There are meetings during the day. There are meetings that can be called in a minute, and I need to react to that. So I had that in mind when I ran, and I would hope that everybody else would have that same thought. So I'm definitely in favor of staying with the 2 o'clock. I'm definitely not in favor of going to the 7. In either case, actually, I think 7 is a late start, so I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Ainsworth and then Mayor Clark.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. When I ran for City Council in 2014, I ran for council when we met at 7 o'clock and council committee at 7. We did that for 4 years. I'd say things went fairly well. When I also ran for re-election in 2018, I was running for the same hours. And to be quite candid, the only reason I did support the temporary change was so that I could actually go to class and finish my class schedule. Now that that is through, it's very much on, okay, well, what are the next steps in the future? And, since it was a trial period and since we've heard from councillors around the table about some of the issues this has created, for me, this is something simple as, we want to be a strong team moving forward and work together. And the easiest way to do that is when folks on your team bring concerns forward and say that there's something that's, personally affecting them within their lives, whether it's to do with work or other things, that we take, a look at that and we say, hey, how can we better work as a team moving forward? And I think this is something very basic and simple in regards to do that. And it's really not about, what we prefer, but it's about what works for us. Some of us, unfortunately, aren't retired or have a flexible work schedule or plan. And we're just looking to be able to, do what we need to at the table and be able to do it effectively. And Councillor Falls has made some good points about in regards to conversations with staff. Sometimes those are quite tight, and we want to make sure we have some of those good conversations in advance so we don't have to bog down the meeting once we get here with things. But it's just, I would say it's a personal ask from different members of council around the table, and we've done it as a trial period, and clearly that's not working or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Mayor Clark?
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I think, and through you to my council colleagues, a couple of items today I'm of two minds on, and this is one of them. The first comment I would make is that we agreed just a few months ago to enter into a trial period, which I believe was to run until next April. So I'm a little hesitant to stop a process that we did, I think, all agree on moving forward until that trial period is over. The second point, I would also echo what Councillor Lauer and Councillor Iman has said. I intimately know many people that work not 9-to-5 traditional jobs, and their only opportunity to ever partake in any kind of council activity would be if there was a meeting held during the day. The one thing that did come up during the last term of council a few times, and I believe even to one of the members that spoke a moment or two ago, was that for those who start at 7 or 8 or even 9 in the morning, and for those occasions where we go to 10 or 11, 11:30 at night, we're creating 14 or 15-hour days. And the ability to focus on an important issue during any kind of vibrant discussion or debate after 14 or 15 hours diminishes significantly. And that was one of the rationale that some members put forward in the last council, even before we brought the resolution forward. So that was a very real issue. Also, if I could ask a question through you of staff before I make a final comment, I would just like to know the number of complaints that we may have lodged since changing the process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, since moving council committee meetings to 2 p.m. as of May 1st, 2019, staff have not received any correspondence in opposition to this change, and we're not aware of any issues brought forward to our attention.
Thank you. And if I may close with a final comment, I understand the rationale for this, and I understand how it may closely affect some folks. I am willing to revisit this, but I think I would like to state what we agreed to just a few months ago and let this trial period run its course. Thank you.
Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I think Mayor Clark brings up a good point in regards to the trial period. So I actually checked with staff earlier. So this report is specifically looking at 2020. So it would be starting in January, and our trial period only goes till January 1st. So this would be moving after the trial period to that time, just to help your concerns in that regard.
Mayor Clark?
Indeed, if I may respond to that, I understand, but at this point, I'm not able to adjudicate the effectiveness of the trial period 4 or 5 months before the end of the trial period. Thank you. Sorry, it may not be April, but I understand.
Any other questions? Councillor Gavel?
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. As everybody knows, I have a full-time job. To echo some comments around the table earlier, when I ran for council, meetings were at 7 o'clock. I realized there were some daytime meetings. I'm very fortunate that I have an employer that's been very flexible with me to accommodate that and allow me to be here. I have spoken to other people that would be interested in running for council, and when this change was made, so I ran 7 o'clock meetings, I was elected, and then the change was made after the fact, to someone's point. And I have heard people say that they simply wouldn't be able to run if that's the case, because they wouldn't have that time available. I'm not sure that I would have To Councillor Lauer's point about the 7 o'clock starts being late and that meetings can run late, perhaps a compromise is to start a little earlier, 6 o'clock perhaps for all of the meetings. I think that would work. I really feel we don't want to eliminate any possible people from sitting at this table and trying to contribute to the city. And I think that's what this does. Thank you.
Councillor Heen.
Following up on Councillor Campbell's comment, and I was about to suggest an amendment to the amendment that we have the meetings begin at 6 o'clock rather than 7 o'clock, and that might be a bit of a compromise.
So do we have an amendment? Do we have some numbers being thrown around right now? Do you want to make an official amendment, Councillor Lauer?
Thank you, Councillor Klooster. I would amend it to 5:30.
Okay, do you have a seconder? Councillor Heen? Okay. Let's wait for the
Through you,
motion.
Mr. Chair, if I may, one of the important components of what we do is ensuring that our media is able to actually live stream as well as be present. So we have not consulted with the media on the 5:30 time period, just so that you're aware that we have not had that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Follis?
I'm open to 5:30, but I'm skeptical that, through the chair, I'm skeptical that that everyone would be able to make, if they work a 9-to-5 job, if they're coming in from out of town, it could potentially be an extra obstacle there. I know it's being a little persnickety, but I don't know. I think 6 p.m., if we're playing with half hour, that 30 minutes might make a difference for someone coming in to view the council.
Councillor Campbell?
I'd also remind everyone at the table that, through the chair, that if our meetings were starting at 5:30, any closed session would be earlier than that, 4:30, perhaps even earlier.
Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I know that some of the concerns are around how late the meetings goes. I would definitely be amenable to going to a 6 o'clock start. I think in the spirit of this conversation, we've identified some issues around the council table on both sides, and I think it's important that we do meet somewhere in the middle on this that helps everybody out. And I think that looking at a 6 o'clock with the idea that, for example, if we do have a closed session or some sort of planning meeting, it will be a bit earlier than that, and that also gives us some flexibility in regards to where that number is. So I think I would be happy to. I'm not sure if we have an amendment ready for the 6 o'clock, but I would be happy to move or second that amendment moving forward, and further discuss it once it's on the table.
Councillor Sapola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to staff, other councillors within our area, some of them meet Barrie, Toronto I know meets during the day all the time, but how about Barrie and Collingwood and all those? How do they meet?
Ms. Williams?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the benchmarking conducted in December 2018 regarding what other municipalities are doing for their meeting times. I know Barrie their meetings generally start at 7 p.m. The townships of Romera and Oro-Medonte do have afternoon meetings, as well as the County of Simcoe, District of Muskoka, and the larger cities of Guelph, Mississauga, and Ottawa all have daytime meetings.
Thank you.
Just wait for the amendment. Need a seconder for the 6 p.m. slot? Oh, Councillor Campbell? Okay, I'll read the motion. Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, second by Councillor Campbell. That the motion now before committee be amended by deleting the first paragraph, 7 p.m., and replacing with 6 p.m., and deleting in the second paragraph, 7 p.m., and replacing with 6 p.m. Discussion? Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I will be supporting this amendment moving forward. I think it's important that we do work together as a team on this one. And just noting some of the stats in regard to different municipalities, a lot of the smaller municipalities as well don't have council committee. They just have their meetings all at once. Some of them as well only have one meeting a month. Other larger municipalities, for instance, I know Toronto was referenced. Well, you're getting paid about $120,000 as well. So if you pay me that as well, if you increase our pay, I'll meet anytime you want, even on the weekends. So just a thought. But seriously, though, we've identified some concerns around the table, and we're just trying to make sure that it works better for everybody.
Okay, I'll call the question to the amendment. All those in favor? That's carried. I'll read the original motion as amended. Moved by Councillor Follis, second by Councillor Ainsworth, that this committee recommends to council that further to report CD-19-15 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Clerk's Department. The 2020 council meeting schedule be adopted as set out in Schedule A of the report, with the exception that council committee and council meetings be indicated to begin at 6 p.m. and that Chapter 12 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code Council Committee procedure be amended to allow council meetings to occur at 6 p.m. as amended. Ms. Williams?
Through Mr. Chair, due to this amendment changing the regular council meeting as well to 6 p.m., we do need an amendment to amend Chapter 22 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code to allow regular council meetings to occur at 6 p.m. So if there is a mover and seconder, we can get that amendment properly before council committee.
Councillor Campbell and Councillor Heen will amend that. Yep. Councillor Ement? Oh, discussion on the amendment? Yes, go ahead.
Once we pass that, then we'll come back and have discussion on the overall amendment or overall motion? Okay.
Yes. I'm just waiting for the amendment for regular council meeting. So I'll read the amendment, moved by Councillor Campbell, second by Councillor Heen, that the motion now before committee be amended by adding the following paragraph, and that Chapter 22 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code Council procedure be amended to allow council meetings to occur at 6 p.m. Discussion? All those in favor? 2, 3, 4, 5. It's carried. Now I'll read the amendment. Moved by Councillor Follis, second by Councillor Ainsworth, that this committee recommends to council that further to report CD-1915 dated September 3rd, 2019 from the Clerk's Department, the 2020 council meeting schedule be adopted as set out in Schedule A of the report, with the exception that council committee and council meetings be indicated to begin at 6 p.m. and that Chapter 12 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code Council Committee procedure be amended to allow council committee meetings to occur at 6 p.m. and that Chapter 22 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code Council procedure be amended to allow council meetings to occur at 6 p.m. as amended. Discussion. Councillor Ement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I'm somewhat disappointed that we have not acknowledged in this this motion the commitment we made to the public that we would trial the issue through until the end of the year, and I think that that's a legitimate point that should be considered. I will be supporting this on the basis that Councillor Ainsworth's argument that it's important for us on procedural matters of this nature that we all work together to show solidarity amongst ourselves and for the benefit of the people of Orillia. And as a result, I will support this and continue to fit it into my schedule as I do the other commitments that I have on behalf of the city.
Okay, Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to thank Councillor Eamon for his support on this, as well as others around the table. And just to clarify, I was wondering if staff could touch on this. I know we had our conversation earlier that this particular motion touches on starting in 2020, so it would start at the end of that trial period, which would be January, whenever our first meeting is there.
Okay, Mayor Clark.
Thank you. So the question I have, if this is successful, what assurance do we have from staff that the media will be able to adjust for wholesome coverage? And if there isn't assurance, is it worth deferring until we get that assurance?
Ms. Williams?
Through you, Mr. Chair, members of the local media who do provide coverage of City Council meetings were circulated on the options within the report, which did include an option for a 6 p.m. meeting, and they were able to accommodate that.
Indeed, thank you.
Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to council referrals. Deputy Clerk, read property standards, clean and clear bylaws, and I believe Mr. Crawford is here to address. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. As councilors know, at times I can be a little bit long-winded. This will be one of those times. So the purpose of this report is to outline options and the impact of increasing the level of service for both the property standards bylaw as well as the clean and clear bylaw. Currently, the clean and clear bylaw is primarily enforced by the city's municipal bylaw enforcement officers. They are part of the Legislative Service Division of the Clerk's Department. The property standards bylaw is primarily enforced by the building inspectors, which are part of the building division, which forms part of the Development Services and Engineering Department. Both of those particular bylaws are currently enforced on a reactive basis only, meaning that they're only enforced if a complaint is first submitted. As noted in the report, the average response times between when a clean and clear bylaw complaint is submitted and when an officer actually investigates is approximately 5.5 days. Again, that's for clean and clear. With respect to property standards bylaw enforcement, what the report notes is that the time between when the complaint is submitted and when the building inspector investigates is between 3 and 6 weeks, depending on the time of year. The rationale for the delayed response times is set out in the report. So having said all of that, there are 3 options for council's consideration. Option 1 is to refer to 2020 budget deliberations the possibility of adding part-time staff and transferring responsibility of property standards enforcement from the building inspectors to the city's municipal bylaw enforcement staff. Option 1 is intended to accomplish 3 things. 1, to improve the response times, particularly for the property standards bylaw. Secondly, to enable proactive enforcement of the clean and clear bylaw. And then thirdly, the concept of transferring the responsibilities is to free up time for the building inspectors to undertake their primary task, which is reviewing building plans, issuing building permits, conducting inspections associated with building permit applications, etc. So those are sort of the 3, things that are trying to be accomplished with option 1. So option 1 would involve hiring 2 part-time officers. One officer would work 40 hours per week, and then we'd have another officer that would work approximately 20 hours per week. Moving on to option 2 of the report. Option 2 is similar to option 1 in that you would still see the property standards enforcement transferred from the building division to the legislative services division. But where it is different is that instead of hiring additional staff, what would be done is council would direct a further reduction of parking enforcement by a further 25%. So the idea being is that if you reduce parking enforcement duties by 25%. It would free up time for the city's bylaw enforcement officers to be able to take on the property standards enforcement initiative. The other key difference between option 2 and then option 1 is that option 2 does not contemplate proactive enforcement of the clean and clear bylaw. It's only, the intent of option 2 would be only to improve the response times of the complaints that are received regarding property standards and clean and clear. And of course, option 3 would be to receive the report as information. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Emond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Crawford. I understand the response time being actually taking an action. Do we always acknowledge the complaint in a timely manner? In other words, if we get a written complaint, do we speak to or respond to the complainant and saying, "Thank you, we've got your complaint. Our offices are scheduled, and we'll be able to visit your property sometime between this date and this date," giving us enough flexibility, or do we just show up when we show up?
To be honest, through Mr. Chair, I mean, we don't give a timeline in terms of when we're going to respond. So to answer your question specifically, we deal with it, as time permits.
If I may continue for a minute, I'm dealing with the healthcare system, and I'm on a wait list, and it's useful for me to know, even though I don't like the answer, it's useful for me to know what that answer is when I engaged my healthcare provider. At least then I have the relief that I'm in the system. And I'm just wondering if we introduced a mechanism to ensure that people knew they were in the system and something was going to happen, we might get a reduction. That's a comment. I have a second question, and that is, do you classify complaints in any manner so that a complaint that has more urgency in terms of, say, health or safety or something of that nature gets dealt with at a more timely manner than something that is, yes, like a deck being built on the wrong piece of property or something like that? I mean, I haven't thought through the examples, but the idea that not all complaints are of equal urgency, and therefore maybe if we had a classification system inside, our people would be dealing with those where there was potential risk at a higher level than not.
So through Mr. Chair, we generally try to deal with the complaints in the order that they were received. But having said that, if there is a matter that is urgent, such as a safety type of issue, then it gets moved to the top of the pile and would be dealt with more promptly than some of the other complaints that had come in.
Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank Mr. Crawford for taking the time to go through the options with us and explain that. I feel that this is a very important issue within our community. And to be quite frank, other than snow removal, no offense, Andrew, I would say this is the most major complaint we get, which is in regards to city bylaws, as we have so many. I would be happy to support option 2 moving forward. I would like to see something a bit more blended down the road when we get to budget, because I don't think maybe reducing the parking, I'd prefer to put more funding towards the bylaw department in that regard to help with that enforcement and to improve the response times. I think they're a little bit long, but with the understanding that we have so many complaints coming in, that happens, and hopefully we can help support that in the future. On the other hand, I do not support option 1. I do not support proactive enforcement when it comes to this particular bylaw or set of bylaws. I think when you get into more proactive enforcement in regards to this, we move towards more of a police state. And I think, as some of my colleagues like to joke, the word, the slippery slope, but that's really what it is. If you want people coming and searching through your backyard when you're not there, or when you're out having a barbecue, that's the kind of option that you want. I don't think that's the right move for the city or for anywhere else, to be quite frank. I think if you have an issue within your community, you can reach out to either staff or to council and say, hey, I noticed this is going on. We give that to bylaw, or bylaw receives it, and then they can go and check that out. But the big thing with that is we need to give our bylaw department the support they need in order to be effective with that, to increase their response times and help out with that but I do not believe that proactive enforcement is a positive step for the city, which is why I'll be supporting option number 2. So if I have a seconder for that, I'd be happy to get that on the floor.
Councillor Heen, second that motion, yes. We have actually Councillor Sapola for discussion, and then Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proactive part of it, I totally support the proactive part of it, because if you look around, I make it a point of driving around my ward at least once a month. And over the last couple of years, as I have talked to Mr. Crawford, you start to see a lot of clean and clear stuff that needs to be done in order to make our community a lot cleaner and a lot safer. If you look around some of the streets, there's furniture on the front lawn, there's furniture on the everywhere else. So the clean and clear bylaw is a necessity, and I think that option 1 is probably the more important one at this time. And I've had quite a few complaints, as Mr. Crawford will attain to, about clean and clear. So my question to Mr. Crawford is: right now, it's the planning department that looks after the clean and clear, and it takes a little longer for them to be proactive. Is that how I read this?
Through Mr. Chair. So the Clean and Clear bylaw is enforced by the city's bylaw enforcement officers, which
Correct.
are part of the Legislative Service Division, which is part of the Clerk's Department. The Building Division, they don't look after the Clean and Clear bylaw, they look after the Property Standards bylaw.
Right. Correct. Okay, so I will be supporting option 1, just because we need to be proactive, unless we want to amend option 2 to go the proactive way and still cut down the expense a little bit.
Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I was supporting option 2 because I liked the idea of having the 25% reduction in parking tickets, and I think both the DOMB and our citizens at large would definitely support that. And option 2 ends up by coming at $20,000 less on our overall budget, and I think that that's a positive move as well.
Okay, I'm just going to read option 2, the amendment here. Councillor Ainsworth is the mover and Councillor Heen is the seconder. This committee recommends to council that further to the report CD 19-16 dated September 26, 2019 from the Clerk's Department and Development Services and Engineering Departments, a request be submitted as part of the 2020 budget deliberations to reduce proactive parking enforcement patrols at the current paid on-street and off-street municipal parking spaces located in the downtown area effective January 1st, 2020, such that approximately 25% less parking tickets are issued annually, and that if the budget request is approved through the 2020 budget deliberations, Policy 1.10.4.3, Chapter 865, Maintenance Occupancy Standards, be amended as set out in Schedule A of the report. Discussion, I have Mayor Clark and then Councillor Lauer.
I'm not Mayor Clark, but I'm going to go first.
You were jumped.
He's just my IQ.
So, I think the most important part of this whole report is the idea of being proactive. And I have to ask, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Crawford, surely 1.5 seasonal employees could not create a police state. I mean, we're not talking about a full force of people going from neighborhood to neighborhood. We are going to be probably hitting the low-hanging fruit here, the couch that's been out on the front yard for a couple of weeks, things like that, as opposed to going door to door measuring grass.
Through Mr. Chair, the idea of the proactive enforcement, I mean, it would be enforced similar to how the approach that we use now, where we try to be reasonable, we try to work with property owners to bring them into compliance. So whether it's reactive or proactive, we would still employ those sort of, those enforcement concepts. But it's just we're going to be dealing with a greater number of people because we're going to be basically driving from street to street. And if there's if there's violations identified, then we would be dealing with them. There's some discretion in enforcement, but certainly any blatant violations would be addressed for sure. But again, we would be reasonable in terms of enforcement if that's what you're asking. We'd still apply the same enforcement approach.
Thank you. I have another question as well, but I'll let the mayor go ahead.
Mayor Clark?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions, one comment and then a couple of questions. I agree that 1.5 additional people isn't going to create a police state, but I do understand Councillor Ainsworth's comment because there was a gentleman, person in one part of Orillia that launched quite a few complaints about his neighborhood over a few years. And when I say quite a few, I mean in the dozens. I think that person became known in that neighborhood, but I did agree to go walking the neighborhood with him one day. And there was a father, I did tell this story a few years ago, there was a father out on the sidewalk watching his son with his bicycle jump over a little ramp on the sidewalk and having fun in the neighborhood as they should be. And when he looked up and saw this gentleman and saw myself, he became very nervous and moved the ramp off the sidewalk and started pulling just some short little weeds out between the sidewalk slabs. So it wasn't a police state, but it was also an atmosphere that I really, I didn't wish to create and certainly didn't want to create that day. So that's really just a comment. Two questions. One is goes back to a real question Councillor Lehman asked of our manager of legislative services. I understand we don't associate a timeline with any kind of response when we receive a complaint, but do we acknowledge the concern right away with an indication that we will be doing something as soon as we can? That's the first question. And secondly, and I know as it'll come to budget with numbers, and I did look for it a couple times. I haven't seen it. With a 25% reduction in parking tickets downtown, two questions related to that. A, I assume that's on top of the 20% reduction we recently passed. And secondly, what would that equate to roughly in the dollars on an annual basis? Thank you.
Through Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Sorry, thank you. Through Mr. Chair, with respect to the parking ticket piece, so you are correct. So it would be a 25% reduction over and on top of the already 20% reduction that council employed last year.
So if I may, there were two other questions. One through you to Mr. Crawford. One is, even though we don't have given associated timeline with a receipt of the concern, acknowledgement of the concern, do we give an acknowledgement of the concern saying that it'll be taken care of as soon as possible without an associated timeline? And number two, do we know what that 25% reduction in parking tickets would translate into dollars on an annual basis?
Sorry, through Mr. Chair, with regard to the financial piece, what I'd indicated in the report is that the approximate full year impact of reducing the parking enforcement would be about $38,000.
Thank you. And I do apologize for missing that. I did look for that. Thank you.
No problem. The other question with regard to the complaints, I'm not quite clear, and maybe I can defer to Ms. Ruff on this one, but when a complaint is submitted in through the city's website, is there an acknowledgement that automatically comes back to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that through our complaint website that actually it has to be responded to by staff. So, for example, Ms. Bolton monitors the general complaint line, if you will, and so it's a direct response from staff. I don't believe that we have it set up at this point in time. And perhaps we can certainly look into that. In terms of acknowledging when somebody submits a complaint in writing for a property matter, historically there hasn't been a response to that letter. Usually it's a discussion that the officers have with the complainant to tell them about the process in which to complain. And I would gather and confirm through Mr. Crawford that the enforcement folks would advise the potential complainant that it will be dealt with in due course. We could certainly turn our minds to moving forward with an administrative process whereby we acknowledge all of those complaints that we do receive. It would just be additional administrative time, but certainly something that we could turn our minds to as an enhanced level of service.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Emond and then Councillor Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 points. One on the latter one, that I found in the complaints that come to me personally, that if I spend 5 or 10 minutes speaking with the individual, they have vented their frustration and their angst about what's going on, and their complaint tends to become significantly less meaningful in their life overall. So the investment of that time, I think, can in fact ease the going forward. My second point is that I spent a lot of time last year and the year before, and I think maybe even the year before, on the parking working group. And we debated many, many times the various things that influence parking. And we acknowledged that the level of enforcement is a critical strategy for managing our parking assets. Never once did we mention that the enforcement of the Clean and Clear bylaw had any impact on parking in any manner, and therefore linking the level of enforcement of parking to our enforcement of Clean and Clear is a totally illogical connection. And the parking fine level should be reserved to the Parking Advisory Committee and our debates at this table whether we want or desire less enforcement. Obviously, if you ask the citizens, they don't want any enforcement at all. But if we did that, we'd have no revenue at all. So my view is that that's a totally inappropriate linkage, and I won't be supporting this motion. I will support our budget committee reviewing the additional resource to enable this to happen, but not through that vehicle unless the parking people come to us at some point and say, the best strategy you could implement, Council, for managing parking is to reduce fine enforcement for 25%, and here's why.
Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, just before I get into my comments, just on Councillor Emond's, I think it's resource allocation in regards to staff time, and I do think it's directly related. So I just wanted to make those comments quite clear. Moving on to my points about option 2, I think that we have a wonderful community and great citizens here in Orillia. And the reality is, I don't think that our citizens are lazy. I think if they see an issue within their community or on their street or, in a community a couple blocks over, they can bring that forward to either council or to staff and let those issues come forward and get those issues addressed. We don't need to have proactive enforcement in order for that to happen. We have to have people that are willing to actually take a minute and make a complaint. And I'd recommend, Councillor Sepola, you mentioned you drive around your ward, once a month or so. If you see something that's out there, feel free to bring that to Mr. Crawford and let him know about those so we can take and have some enforcement in that regard. I think the real big issue here is not so much about complaints and everything, it's about funding. And clearly there is a lack of funding for this department, which needs some support. It's been shown that we have a certain time gap in between when an issue comes in and then to when it actually gets addressed, which from the public's perspective is, oh, well, the city's not doing anything about this. And that's where I think it's creating a lot of these issues and a lot of the discussions coming to council is because people are, coming forward with their issues, but they're not seeing them get addressed right away. Well, proactive enforcement is not going to fix that. An increase to funding to a department that is lacking funding in this area is going to help that. So I'd be happy to bring this discussion to budget and help support it when it comes there with the funds that it does need.
Councillor Sepola, and then I'll call the question.
Thank you. As you know, Councillor Klooster, you and I did drive around our ward, and we spent, about 2.5, 3 hours that one day, and you can see that it's starting to change. More cumulative, I call it junk within yards, within the street, within all over. So I really think we have a really important part to make our city cleaner, better for living, and accommodate the people that live in that area, and rather than call it a poor area of town or whatever it is, because that's what promotes, I got to be careful how I say this, but promotes criminal activity in some area because they see it as as a place where you dump materials and everything else. So, and I know maybe Councillor Kuster, you might want to speak on it, what we found, but it is getting more and more and more every day. So I think option one will do what we want it to do and even on a trial basis for a year, once we approve it through budget. But it's really important that we start keeping our clean city, both from economic development for tourists and for our own citizens. Letting stuff lay around and everything else just doesn't do create a very positive outlook for our city, for people visiting us.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, and then Mayor Clark.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. First of all, amending the corporate policy so that this falls under legislative services or bylaw just completely makes sense to me. I think that's where it should be. As for proactive response, I can't tell you how many times someone has said to me, have you seen such and such an address? It's an absolute mess. Why doesn't the city do something about it? And for my response to be, well, no one's complained about it, is ridiculous. I mean, if we have bylaw out driving around doing their jobs and they see an issue, they should be able to address that. It shouldn't take someone complaining about it. So I'll be supporting option one.
Okay, Mayor Clark.
Yes, sorry, I'm just looking for clarification on what we're what we're discussing, whether it's option one, option two, or whether even the amendment.
I'm going to call the question on this one right now. So all those in favor of the option that's on the screen. This is option two. I've called the question. All those in favor? Hands up, please. That's 4. It's lost, sorry.
But either way.
No, I'm not going to read the original motion for option 1, so I will just call the question. Sorry, discussion?
Sorry,
It's a whole new thing. I'll read it again. Go ahead, Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Through the chair, I did want to make a brief comment because I had been talking with Mr. Crawford earlier today. One of my fears with proactive enforcement was that people wouldn't be able to grow natural gardens. And in talking with Mr. Crawford, I've found that there are exemptions that can be made. So if there's someone at home concerned about the natural garden that they keep, they're more than welcome to reach out to our bylaw department or myself just to get more information on how to go about doing that. But that's something that was a bit of a relief for me. So, yeah, thanks.
I also need a mover and a seconder for the motion that's on the floor. Moved by Councillor Sapola, second by Councillor Lauer. This committee recommends to Council that further to the report CD 19-16 dated September 26, 2019 from the Clerks and Development Services and Engineering Departments, a proposal be submitted to the 2020 budget deliberations to transfer primary responsibility of enforcing the property standards bylaw from the Building Division to the Legislative Services Division and implement a citywide proactive enforcement initiative of Chapter 834 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code, Clean and Clear, including hiring 1.5 seasonal enforcement officers and purchasing a vehicle. And if the budget request is approved to the 2020 budget deliberations, policy 1.10.4.3, Chapter 865, maintenance occupancy standards be amended as set out in Schedule A of the report. And that if the budget request is approved through the 2020 budget deliberations, policy 1.10.4.2, Chapter 834, clean and clear be amended as set out in the Schedule B of the report. And that Chapter 834 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code, clean and clear, be amended to exempt land, zones, open space 1, rural and environmental protection in the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw from the provision prohibiting grass or weeds in excess of 8 inches in height. And that if the budget request is approved, staff report to Council Committee in 2021 on the outcome of the citywide proactive enforcement initiative of Chapter 834 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code, clean and clear. Discussion. Councillor Eamon and Councillor Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me say that I want my earlier comments were directed towards the linkage of parking and clean and clear, and they weren't intended in any way to suggest that Mr. Crawford wasn't creatively trying to find a way to manage within the budget that is allocated, and that our issue really is, do we have enough budget? And I don't believe we do, so I'm going to support this. On the other hand, I also think when we get to debate this at budget time, the opportunity, and maybe we can have staff input at that time, is that one of the challenges we face in government at any level is we want to treat our citizens equitably. We want everybody to have access to a service, and we want everybody to feel that they have access to a service. That doesn't mean we treat everybody equally. There is a difference between equal treatment, which means we do the same thing in every case, versus equitable. And we get into a lot of trouble in healthcare, we get into a lot of trouble in education and elsewhere because we try and do the same thing everywhere in the province, and some parts of the province, that's just not possible. Well, this is an area where my colleague across the table points out that there is someone who is obviously an irritant in the community. It's been an irritant. It's a situation that needs to be corrected. But to put that in the same class of clean and clear or building standard issue as someone who was away for 6 weeks and the grass didn't get cut because they forgot to ask their neighbor to do it or their counselor, because that's a service we obviously provide at the end of the season, it suggests that maybe we need to be able to distinguish in our rules and regulations that there are different levels of enforcement or different circumstances. I know that makes it much more difficult because it puts a lot more judgment into the hands of the people we have, but we hire good people. I think we pay them well, and my hope is that we can work together to find a way to do something of that nature to ensure that our enforcement doesn't become seen as Big Brother and that kind of thing, because I do believe that there are circumstances in this community today where it would be useful for us to take action.
For that, Mayor Clark on this, and then yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to respond to Councillor Raymond. My sense is, from dealing with a number of issues over the last few years, is that our staff are fairly adept at exercising discretion when warranted, and I think that's largely because of the manager of legislative services imparting that value in them. So that's my experience. And lastly, and just as importantly, I would like to thank Councillor Raymond for the service he provides in his ward for cutting grass, because I am one of his constituents. Thank you.
Very well. And Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Just before I comment on my stance on this motion, I did want to say that in regards to the first part, which is kind of moving around some of the responsibilities, I think that is a very positive step in the right direction. I'd be happy to support that portion. But as I mentioned when we were talking about the previous item, I do not support proactive enforcement. I think we really need to discuss and talk about what the real issue is, and the real issue is the lack of funding for that enforcement. It's not that we're not getting enough complaints in. It's just we're not being able to get to a lot of them in a timely fashion. So moving to something like proactive enforcement and only hiring 1.5 folks, and it was joked about that that's not going to create a police state. Well, that's also not going to solve the issue. The issue is the lack of funding in that regard, which directly affects how fast that staff can go. And so even if they are doing it proactively, that's even going to create more of a backlog in regards to how many complaints there are, because they're going to be receiving complaints as well as they're going to be seeing their own. So that's not going to be fixing the issue. The issue is the funding and making sure the funding there is available for that. And I think that can be done without proactive enforcement and actually get the job done. And if there's somebody who sees a couch someplace and they clearly have an issue with it, they should take the time to actually complain about it. And if they don't want to take the time, well, obviously it's not that important to them.
Councillor Falls.
Thanks. Through the chair, I wanted to say first that, like all of us here, I'm sure I have complete confidence in the bylaw department for working with citizens, and I know that they're very competent in that manner. I think initially I was warming to this option, but I think I do agree with Councillor Ainsworth that we want to forward policy that's in the spirit of Orillia, and I think proactive enforcement doesn't necessarily do that. There's other ways of accomplishing that. Certainly, I agree that more resources need to be put in towards enforcing these types of issues, but yeah, as it's written, I can't support this this motion. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Lauer, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Klusser. I am in favor of this. I think you just need to look at what happens downtown with parking. It's a proactive situation that we can monitor and we can adjust and we can move and we can respond to. I believe staff, as stated by several other councillors, have enough experience and enough people skills that they know how to handle these things. But I just go back to the point that Councillor Campbell made. You know, it's a tough one to explain to people when there's an actual issue going on, and that you are saying that until somebody complains, until the public actually does the complaining, that nothing can be done. And that's that's just not, in my opinion, a comfortable position to be in, and not a constructive. We're not looking to find every blade of grass that is over 8 inches. We are looking to deal with the blatant violations. And I think the report says that this may be front-ended. We may have to do this for a couple of years, and then it will become less of a demand, and we may be able to actually return to some sort of hybrid. But I think we need to put this in place now, and have that as one of our tools. The other thing I would point out that I wasn't in support of option 2, because for us to sit here and make a great decision of reducing the parking, I think Councillor Eamon mentioned this, but to make a decision that we should arbitrarily decrease enforcement in the downtown is not good politics. We've spent a lot of time working on the parking issue downtown. They have a vested interest. They have definite opinions down there, and I can assure you that reducing enforcement by almost 50% in 1 year is not going to go without some questions and some debate. So I think we can float that idea at the first Parking Advisory Committee, and certainly if they said no, that's a great idea, then the funds loosened up from that action could be transferred to the other side of enforcement. But I don't think it's in our best interest to make that decision.
Okay, Councillor Ainsworth, and then I'll call the question.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on one of my comments, as I know a couple other councillors have touched on it. What I mean in regards to when somebody comes forward to you with a complaint or with an issue that's going on in the community, I'm not in any way saying that you say, oh, well, sorry, staff's not going to do anything about it unless you complain. I think the conversation there is, would you like me to forward that complaint to the bylaw department for you, or would you like me to give you their information so that you can go forward and do that? Because some folks just are not sure how to make that complaint. But if folks say to you, oh, well, no, I don't want to complain, I don't want you to go and complain for me, well, then clearly it's not a big enough issue. But we have the ability to talk to them and say, hey, thank you so much for noticing that within their community. I would be happy to bring that to, Mr. Crawford's attention or the other bylaw staff and start that process for you. So I'm not saying that it's an opportunity for us to say, oh, well, sorry, we're not going to do anything. It's an opportunity for us to actually do something about it. But as I mentioned earlier, the issue is really a lack of funding. And so hopefully we can get some more funding for this department. And I do not think that proactive enforcement is the way we can get the job done, which, as Councillor Sproul and others have mentioned, if we want to clean up the city, well, we got to put some money towards it. And we don't need to move towards proactive in order to do that.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion that's in front of you? That's carried. Now introduce Deputy Clerk, leash-free dog zones from the Park Recreation and Culture Department. We have Larry Smith and John McMullen and Mr. Merkley. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of committee. The purpose of this report is to provide council with a policy for screening potential leash-free areas. As per direction from Council Committee, the Recreational Advisory Committee and Parks, Recreation and Culture staff developed the City of Orillia leash-free areas policy to be used when screening city-owned lands. This draft policy for the creation of leash-free areas has been recommended by the Recreational Advisory Committee, and the primary aspects of the proposed policy are that these areas be a minimum of 1 acre, that these areas be fenced, that the leash-free areas be buffered from adjacent land uses, that they be buffered from internal park uses, that they be compatible with the park's design and layout, and that there be supporting amenities. As indicated in the staff report, using this proposed policy to screen city-owned parks, 6 existing municipal parks are candidates for leash-free areas. A site-specific analysis would be required of each of those parks when they are designated for improvements. Staff is recommending that the policy for leash-free areas be adopted as set out in Schedule A, and that the parkland feasibility review as set out in Schedule B of the report be received as information.
Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Ainsworth and Councillor Heen. That this committee recommends to council that is recommended report PRCR-19-04 dated September 24, 2019 from the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department, policy 7.1.2.4 leash-free areas be adopted as set out in Schedule A of the report, and that the parkland feasibility review as set out in Schedule B of the report be received as information. Discussion? Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, happy to support this motion moving forward, and I'd just like to thank staff for the time on this. I know previously council has talked about adding a 3rd dog park to our inventory within the city, but it's nice that especially moving forward, we do have an area where we can look at now and say, hey, you know, this is the criteria moving forward. We're not just going to put it anywhere, and that we also have some options potentially to look at in the future. I think that's moving us in the right direction. I'm definitely happy to have those conversations moving forward once we get to the budget process about if we want to look into one of these particular parks, or if we want to put some money aside to look at drawing up plans, that kind of thing. But moving forward in the future, I know some folks have discussed, potentially the city might be getting more land if there's amalgamations or things like that. But if we do take on more land, it's really good that we do have this criteria so that we can either add to one of these many lists and make sure that we have that. So when folks are big on lobbying and saying, oh well, my park needs this, we say, okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much for telling us that. But let's look at the criteria and the reasoning behind that. And staff has created that for us. So thank you so much for the work.
Okay, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. I too want to thank staff for the work on this. I also want to thank the committee. Councillor Sapola and myself sit on this committee, and it was incredible the amount of work that members of the committee did, research and looking at what other municipalities are doing, and brought that back for discussion. A lot of work went into this report, and I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you very much indeed.
Mayor Clark and Councillor Lauer and Councillor Sapola.
A quick question, and hopefully the chair will find it germane to the main motion. I was just approached the other day. I'd never even thought about this as an issue, but I did tell somebody I'd bring the question forward to staff, and I'll take this as an opportunity. Just the question was, they had a very small dog, and wondered if in the committee's research, if they found other municipalities that had hived off separate areas for very small dogs. I guess there's issues between the big dogs and small dogs sometimes, but I did say I'd bring that forward. Thank you.
Yes, in fact, that was part of our research. Some of the off-leash areas have separated penned areas depending on the size of the dogs. And I believe in our policy, we do have that as something that should be looked at on a case-by-case basis and as a desirable thing when budget and location allows.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. So as I read this report, it's basically trying to sort of eliminate this, every neighborhood saying, what about there, that kind of thing. So we get that all sorted out and say that we've got designated parks and that's where they're going to go. But this doesn't eliminate non-parks as potential dog leash areas. And I'm thinking there's certainly areas down between the trails or, some oddball spots that might be suitable in land that the city does own. So this doesn't eliminate that.
Through Mr. Chairman, no, it doesn't. We just used the criteria and applied it to the city's specific parklands, but I think if we were looking at others, we would probably apply similar type criteria to it, though.
Criteria, but they wouldn't be eliminated just because they're not in the park.
No.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Falls?
Thanks. Through the chair, I just wanted to say very much in support of this report and all the work that went into it, and hope that it leads to something later on. I was curious, just reading through it, the kind of the reasoning behind the acre requirement. Just if you can shed some light onto that. Thanks.
It actually comes from two different places. Other municipalities have generally accepted that to be the basis of the area that's required. I believe the American Kennel Association has also chimed in and said that. But essentially, that is the amount of space that's considered maintainable. A lot of these areas get really beaten down, the turf, so in order to have an area large enough for dogs to run and to accommodate an appropriate number of dogs, that's the size that sort of received the most buy-in across the board in the municipalities we looked at, as well as these associations that have their own standards.
Councillor Sapola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also like to thank the staff, John in particular, and Larry for the excellent work you did in doing some research and bringing it to the committee. My concern is some of the parks that are on the list, being close to residential and so on. We have an opportunity here for Scouts Valley. Scouts Valley is 200 and some odd acres of land. Chatting with Bob Bowles, he would love to see a trail, leash-free trail in there so that the dog can run and everything else. So that would accommodate it in Scouts Valley as well as a leash-free park. My question is the agreement that we made with the Conservation Authority here, how does that affect Scouts Valley if it does? I understand that we own some of it outright, that we can do something with it. Is there space there for the 1 acre and the small trail for walk your dog leash free?
Through Mr. Chair.
Yep.
The area that's outside of the easement is what's listed as Forest Home Park there. So it's down at the south end of it. We have about 10 acres that's not part of the easement of Scout Valley. If we were to try to do something in Scout Valley, then certainly the Couchiching Conservancy would have to have input into that, development of that.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, so can we have a conversation, maybe RAC and with the Conservation Authority and see what part of it? I did talk to the employee of the authority, and he said that they would be happy to sit down with us and look at it and see how we can work together, because it is away from residential. There's and when you let dogs loose in that, they tend to bark, and being a dog owner and that. But I think Scouts Valley would be a prime site if we can get together with the conservation people.
Mr. Merkley?
Through Mr. Chairman, certainly it's one of the 6 that made the list of ones that would be considered feasible down the road. It's not currently within our 10-year budget plan to do that, but it's something we could certainly do exploratory work to see if that is. The idea is that, so for example, Morningstar Park is within the 10-year period, so sometime when that park comes up for renewal and it's in your 10-year plan, it'd be one of the amenities that we'd consider for developing that park.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Heen?
I would really like to thank staff for all the work they've done on this. I know that I went over with John to Hillcrest about a year ago when we were trying to figure out a place for an off-leash park, and when he went through it, I really could understand why Hillcrest Park was not big enough for an off-leash park. And I was picking up on Councillor Lauer's comment about down by the trail, because we've discussed this before, that although there's not a place presently in Ward 1 or Ward 4 for a park, there are areas where we could perhaps have one in Ward 4, because it's the only ward that doesn't have an option at the present time. And I would just comment that I was at Country Produce a couple of days ago with my daughter, and we saw that some people are using the cemetery as an off-leash park. We saw the people with their dogs running through it, and that's really not appropriate either.
Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I have a request for a 10-minute recess, moved by Councillor Sepola, second by Councillor Paulus. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, I'll give everyone another minute or so, and then we'll make our way back to our seats. Councillor Follis, we're going to reconvene now, so if you want to take a seat. We're going to move on to departmental reports, and as I said earlier, one item we moved to the top of the list regarding Economic Development Department reading legal matters, Forest Avenue South encroachments. And I just need a mover and a seconder for the motion, and I'm actually going to introduce Ms. Thompson first to talk about the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Council is aware, the use of the Forest Avenue South Road allowance and adjacent municipally owned water lot has resulted in numerous complaints. In response to these complaints, the City investigated and found a number of unauthorized encroachments on the municipal water lot, which were placed there by the Grape Island Property Owners Association, or JPOA, as well as the adjacent neighbor. Over the past 2 years, the City has been working with stakeholders to develop a permanent solution. Staff recently undertook a survey of Grape Island and Victoria Point residents and received 59 responses. Staff had committed to bringing forward a report to Council this month. However, in August, the City was served with a statement of claim that a legal proceeding has been commenced by JPOA against the City of Orillia. The JPOA claims that their members should have complete and unfettered access to the Forest Avenue South Road allowance, municipally owned water lot, municipally owned concrete pier, and 2 dedicated JPOA docks at all times of the day, throughout the year, using any type of vessel and loading any type of materials. They are seeking proprietary rights over a municipally owned water lot and damages on a per property basis at an approximate value of $3.1 million. Staff are recommending that Council approve the retention of Borden Ladner Gervais to defend the City's position at a cost of $75,000. The City has filed a statement of defense with the courts and is seeking compensation of legal fees. This means that if the court sides with the City and awards damages, the Grape Island Property Owners Association would be required to compensate the City for the majority of legal fees expended. I'm happy to answer any questions Council may have.
Okay, I just need a mover and a seconder for the motion. Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, second by Mayor Clark. That this committee recommends to Council that as recommended report ED-19-16 dated September 26, 2019 from the Economic Development Department, $75,000 for the cost of legal fees to address the Forest Avenue South legal matters be approved from the tax rate stabilization reserve, and that Borden Ladner Gervais LLP be retained to defend the City against this action, and that through the statement of defense, the City pursue a motion for cost against the Grape Island Property Owners Association. Any discussion? Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I will be supporting this motion moving forward. I'm just sad to see that it has come to this point in time. and that it has come to this. I think it's important that for future reference, when other issues do come up, that is very important. The different community groups work together and do work at finding solutions. And when folks do not find solutions, this is the issue we get faced with. So I just want to make that very pointed in the future, that when folks do not work together and try to come to a solution like we did earlier tonight, it can cost money to the city and to the taxpayers.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I'm basically going to echo what Councillor Ainsworth said. When I was elected, the first interview I did actually with media, I was asked what my kind of number one priority was, and I said the Grape Island situation, the Grape Island Forest Avenue situation, and how much I looked forward to sitting down with both sides and coming up with a resolution. During the campaign, that's what I saw, was a willingness on both sides to come up with a solution. I'm very, very disappointed that it's come to this, extremely. That's basically all I can say at this point.
Okay. Any other questions? Mayor Clark?
Just to echo what my two colleagues just said, it is unfortunate that it has come to this. I will say that the city was and had been working on solutions for a long-term agreement that would satisfy everybody. So to see this is extremely disappointing. And anyway, it is where it is. Thank you.
Okay, from the chair, I'm going to make a comment as well. You know, $75,000 from the tax rate stabilization reserve is quite a substantial amount of money that could be used somewhere else in the city. And that the point that it's gotten to this point that now we have to get legal departments involved and other defense to act on the actions of the city and from the different working groups that could not come to a resolution. Moving forward, I hope there is a resolution that does not cost the taxpayers more than the allotted money that is being approved today. So, Mayor Clark?
Sorry, just to expand a little bit on that. So yeah, the $75,000 here in it, and of course the goal of the city will be to reclaim as much of those legal fees as possible. It's an obligation we have to do. We have to protect the taxpayers' dollars. So that is something that I just want people to be aware of as well. Thank you.
Okay, if there are any more questions at all, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now we move on to the rest of departmental reports. Park, Recreation and Culture, Reinvesting in Canada Infrastructure Program Grant. Welcome, Mr. Merkley.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, welcome, Ms. Russell, as well. So go ahead.
All good. Through you, Mr. Chair. The Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program is a federal program designed to create long-term economic growth, build inclusive, sustainable, and resilient communities, and support a low-carbon economy. The province of Ontario is a cost-sharing partner in these programs. The Investing in Canada plan is based on three key objectives: create long-term economic growth, support a low-carbon green economy, build inclusive communities. There are two categories for funding for the Canada Infrastructure Program: rehabilitation and renovation, and multipurpose. Staff considered a wide range of potential municipal projects. Those projects were evaluated against strict program guidelines, and a short list of projects that have the highest potential to qualify as eligible have been identified for council consideration. This report proposes that staff be directed to apply to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for the following projects in this priority order: Brian Orser Arena renovations, number 1. Number 2, waterfront park improvements. Number 3, Atherley Narrows Trail Connection and Fish Weirs Interpretive Center project as part of the multi-purpose category. Thank you.
That this committee recommends to council that is recommended report PRCD-19-09 dated September 24th, 2019 from the Park, Recreation and Culture Department staff be directed to apply to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Community Culture and Recreation through Grants Ontario for the following projects in an order of priority: Brian Orser Arena re-renovations, Waterfront Park improvements, Athlete Narrows Trail Connection, and Fish Weirs Interpretive Center project as part of the multi-purpose category. And any questions from members of council? Councillor Emond?
Mr. Chair, yes, I do have a question through you to staff. I do believe, as I recalled in our earlier meeting and briefing, that Indigenous groups have the ability to apply for a portion of these funds that are dedicated to supporting our First Nations, and that the federal and provincial contribution is significantly greater. And we had chatted about the possibility of the third item here, the Atherley Narrows Trail Connection and Fish Weirs, the Fish Weirs being part of the Indigenous history in this area, and very much a part of what our friends at the Chippewas of Rama hold dear and to them. Have we engaged in conversations about the possibility of that project being something that they could sponsor with potentially the city and the township making a contribution for the portion of the trail piece, but that the rest is really a celebration of our First Nations, and allow us to potentially have a third item that is more specifically something that that only the city has an opportunity under this program to apply for.
Hey, Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then staff have had specific conversations with staff from the province with respect to the grant opportunity. They can elaborate a little bit further. But we have Mayor Clark and Councillor Lauer and myself met with some representatives from the Chippewas of Rama in the last few weeks, and we've had the conversation about this project. And there have been some conversations with the Township of Ramera staff as well. So we will be pursuing, if council does, as council has already sort of turned their minds to this particular project and prioritizing this project, we are going to be pursuing further conversations with those representatives to pursue what is the sort of best opportunity for all to pursue that grant. And so with that, is it potentially Rama actually submitting with Orillia and Ramera being a party to it? Is it Orillia submitting and Rama and Ramera being a party to it? So we're just sourcing out what is the best opportunity. And with that, I believe that staff had some further chats with provincial staff on this.
Mr. Merkley?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I would add is that they did say that regardless if it's a partnership type application, it would still count as one of our applications as well if we were a partner in that. Any partner in an application, it counts as one of their submissions.
Councillor Heen? Oh, sorry, Councillor Eamon, go ahead.
I just have a quick follow-up on that. Does that also apply that if Rama were to make the submission and we were a partner, that it would count as one of their submissions, and therefore we would be relieved from it being one of ours?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So all partners in applications that involve multiple partners, it counts as one of theirs.
Okay. Councillor Heen, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I have several questions, so if that's okay.
You're the only one in queue. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Well, the first one was in the conclusion of your submission, you had said that based on our population, we were entitled to $1.1 million, and that's less than any of the grants that we are applying for. So are we likely to get anything? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Through Mr. Chairman, that was put in the report just for context to show you that if it was a formula-based funding program, that's what we would be entitled to. It's not a formula-based funding program. And for example, in the last intake, when the city applied for a roads project, the city wasn't successful, so we didn't get any share of that pie. So it's assumed that in this case, there'll be some municipalities who will be totally successful and get what they apply for, and others may not get anything this round.
Thank you. I was really, really pleased to see that the skating trail was being included. But where do you propose to put the change room and the mechanical room? Because I know that it's important to make sure that they sort of work into the design of the park.
Through Mr. Chair, yeah, we're certainly sensitive to wanting to reduce the building footprints within the park. So part of that project, there was an addition onto the Orillia Waterfront Center. It's designed that way, that there's a hallway that leads between the two washrooms that would enter into a skate change room area. Right adjacent to the parking lot. We would require a small building that we think we can work into the berming structure that's down there for the ice resurfacer and refrigeration equipment.
And we did apply for funding for this Seymour greenhouse and the sesquicentennial funding, if I remember correctly, and it was turned down. So how are we sort of bumping up that presentation to make sure that it would be approved?
Through Mr. Chairman, the original, the overall project hasn't changed in scope or size. Those grant programs for the sesquicentennial seem to have more of a cultural flavor to it. And in hindsight, it seems like, or appeared that more of the grant money went to nonprofits as part of those grant applications and municipalities. So it was kind of, I think this is a different grant program. It's focused on infrastructure and what's addressed in some of our plans, as opposed to the cultural aspect of the sesquicentennial grant programs.
And my last question is around the Brian Orser arena. I've gone on record as not being terribly supportive of doing a lot of repairs to the Brian Orser arena because I was more in favor of doing a phase 2. And I noticed that phase 2 in the arena doesn't show at all in our 10-year project. So can you comment on the appropriateness of doing a lot of repairs to the Brian Orser and what you see as the future for phase 2?
Through Mr. Chairman, certainly it seemed like an emphasis of the grant programs were things that are in your plans and are supported by past studies. And that certainly would be Brian Orser renovation is there, and it's in our 10-year plan and is supported by past documentation. As far as what would occur is, I think we would address pretty much all of the issues we have related to Brian Orser Arena from a front-end perspective, the change rooms, accessibility, all of that would be upgraded. So the facility, based on what we've invested so far already, and through this grant program, would address the needs of the facility.
So by doing that to the Brian Orser, is that going to bring it up to a first-class facility?
Through Mr. Chair, certainly we believe so. There are some things that you probably won't change to that unless you were building new facilities. So for example, the ice pad at Brian Orser Arena is 90 feet by 180. An NHL size is 85 by 200. So it's actually wider than an NHL, but it's not as long as. So something like that wouldn't change through a renovation project. It would take pretty much a complete rebuild to fix something like that based on the size of the site and the limitations we have of the refrigeration area. But as far as making the facility upgraded with all the current and modern amenities of accessibility and size of change rooms and things like that, it would address those.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sapola. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can ask a couple of questions, I just want to bring something up first. And Brian Orser was built in 1974 as the Twin Lakes Arena, and then it was renamed after our Olympic star, Brian Orser. One of the things I really would like to see is the Brian Orser Arena be moved to fourth position or whatever it is in phase 2 of the renovation or the bill at the rec center that we built, which was anticipated, and even when the word MRF was used at that time, there was 2 arenas. One was 1,200 seats or 1,000 seats and all that. So to renovate something that was built in 1974 doesn't make a lot of sense to me and to a lot of citizens in this city. Having been to a few meetings over the last couple of weeks, and asked that question. And then when it became public that this was coming forward, I had a few phone calls that said, what are we doing on a building that's over 40 years old? My suggestion, and if I can get a mover, is that we move the Brian Orser down to 4th place and put the Phase 2 as our number 1. We already have drawings for it, or conceptual drawings. Councillor Lauer came up with the idea of having a, what do you call it, Tim? Clubhouse or some kind of a room that we can have a field house that we can have winter game or winter practice for soccer, baseball, and now with tennis being a high priority throughout Canada, I think we could put a indoor tennis court in there and be able to be used by seniors and other people in the wintertime. So to me, I support the Atherley Narrows Bridge, but having been on the committee for a couple of years, before, but we don't have any partners. So if all of a sudden they approve that, then the city's commitment is what, $4 million or $3.24 million or whatever it is. Sorry, $4 million. So where are we getting that money? And our partners get away free because we don't have a commitment from them, other than verbally they said we can support it. But they haven't said financially that we're going to support it. But again, to have a brand new facility, and I just want to ask the development proposal or part of it here to Mr. Bartola, if you can, the economic benefits to a 1,000-seat arena with conferences and festivals and other things, does it have a major impact on it?
Depending on the specific event, anything that would drive traffic to the city would obviously, the economic trickle effect would probably be restaurants, obviously, for eating, services, accommodation nights. So depending on how many event nights you'd have, it could be meaningful, that's for sure.
Thank you. The other factor is that if we decide to build a brand new arena, we would be 3 years without an arena, fourth ice surface. So I wonder if I can get a seconder to switch the Brian Orser to 4th and put the Phase 2 to number 1 position or even number 2. I totally support the the skate trail. And like I said, I do support the Fish Weirs Interpretive Center. But I think until we have financial commitment from the partners, I'd really like it to go to 4th place.
You have a seconder, Councillor Spola? Go ahead, Mayor Clark.
Respond to the councillor's request for a seconder, if I may make a few comments first, with your blessing. Thank you.
Only if you get a seconder, Mayor Clark.
Only if I get a seconder. If I get a seconder for my... Anyway, I alluded earlier today that I had a couple of items today that I was of a mixed mind about, or two minds, and this is one of them. I understand Councillor Sapola's passion for Phase 2, and I also see the benefit of Phase 2, and the only time I think I would ever support Phase 2 is with senior levels of government financial support. And this hopefully won't be the last opportunity, but maybe the only opportunity we have in a while. The one thing I'm relatively convinced about is that we do not need a 4th ice surface. I have seen the usage numbers from the last few years, and there is a trend, and even with women's hockey, which is robust and wonderful, filling in for some of the withdrawal of ice time requests from old timers hockey and other events. We are still finding ourselves at both ends of the schedule on a daily basis with more empty ice time. The only time there really is significant competition for ice time is during what is traditionally prime time, after school until sometime in the evening. So not needing a 4th rink, to my mind and others, having that prime time competition, I believed, can be somewhat satisfied, that competition for prime time ice time, by having the skate trail at the park, and that would allow us to take public skating and essentially put it in the park and free up quite a number of hours during those prime time surge periods, especially on weekends, but during the week as well. So that's one comment. The waterfront trail in the Seymour Conservancy is something I would support for a number of reasons, not including the one I just articulated. And I understand that we already have put $500,000 aside towards that waterfront improvement for the Seymour Conservancy. So our contribution of 1.4 as identified in the report would actually drop as it would still be a contribution of 1.4, but we've already not just earmarked, we've actually got $500 sitting aside for that project. So back to Phase 2 and Brian Orser, and I will, over the last few weeks, I have tried to garner people's opinions within the community, and I can tell you my anecdotal evidence is that it's pretty mixed. Some people are saying, why would you spend any more money on Orser? And I say, well, listen, we can put this much money into it and have a facility we'll use for 30 years, and they still do not want to support it. They would rather support Brian Orser, Phase 2, at least for the rink portion. The other comment I hear is that is a residential neighborhood, and they think it's better served by either having affordable housing or more residential development in that area, which of course would add to our tax assessment. So I really think I have not unmuddied the waters on Phase 2 versus the improvement of Orser. A couple of years ago, I was really gung-ho on Phase 2 as opposed to Brian Orser. Now I understand the benefit of doing that, notwithstanding the benefits of turning it into a residential area. Anyway, I think I've rambled on quite enough, Mr. Chair, and if I were you, I'd shut my microphone off. But I will likely support the, notwithstanding my councillor's passion for this project, and if he needs a seconder to at least get it on the floor, I will be a seconder to get it on the floor.
Right. Councillor Emond.
Thank you. I have two comments. One with respect to the age of Brian Orser and renovation versus replacement. I was created in 1940 and I'm facing a renovation on my hip, which I am happy to say is much better than the concept of replacing me, because that wasn't what I was looking for. So I'm not sure that age necessarily is a detriment. But what I would like to comment on is that we all would love to have Phase 2 in our community. But we've just spent $55 million and we haven't even got Phase 1 open yet. I think recreation from the point of view of the investment of our citizens has been adequately served by this council, and probably for the next 10 years or more, notwithstanding that we have an opportunity here. So that I think is important. The other is just basic fiscal responsibility. The contribution the city would be making to Brian Orser is at about $1 million level, I believe, something in that range. For the Phase 2, it would be 7 times that. And that's an amount that is not in any capital program that we have, though we have a capital program that is very much straining to accomplish everything that the city would like to accomplish, both in terms of those projects that our citizens have been hoping would happen and should be happening, and those that we would like to add to that for a variety of reasons, including the complete rebuilding and renovation of our downtown Main Street, which is not currently budgeted. So I just can't, in all consciousness, dedicate that kind of money at this point in the history of our economic progress, nor to satisfy the pleasure we would have in having that facility, when we can, in fact, I think from a practical point of view, provide our citizens with the service level that they require doing the renovation and reconstruction of the current arena.
Councillor Campbell, and then Mayor Clark.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. I have also been, I've had people tell me, don't put any more money into Brian Orser Arena. I've also had people say, don't build a phase 2, we can't afford it, that's crazy. When we're talking about upper levels of government paying for things, I think it really changes the conversation. If we're completely, as a city, completely funding something, or if we're only funding a portion of it, that's a whole different conversation. I've actually been asked more about cricket pitches than I have ice surfaces since I've been elected, but that's another story. My question is this, through you to staff. Adding phase 2 to this, do you feel that that would weaken our chances of getting funding? Like, I know I'm asking you something you may not be able to answer, but would they look at our application and say they're looking for 2 different things here, so we're going to take that off the table completely? You know what I'm...
Markley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly in our discussions with them, they alluded that, like most grant programs, they're already oversubscribed probably of requests that they see coming in. So that's why they had suggested that, 2 or 3 applications would be what they would recommend or be common. I did see one of the municipalities in the newspaper. I think it was London, had put in, I think, 7 applications, or went to council saying they were looking at 7 applications. So it's not that they're not going to, but certainly our ministry reps that we talked to kind of indicated that your best bet is to limit it to 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And follow up to that, the order does matter? The priority does matter to the application?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, they did say we had to submit it in priority order. So they would be looking at it of what we thought our first priority would be. They would give that more weight probably than our second one.
Hey, Mayor Clark, and then Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think it's maybe not appropriate today, but I'm willing to have the debate in the future on what phase 2 or replacement of Councillor Riemann might look like. To address one of Councillor Eamon's points, he's quite right. As identified, the city's contribution for phase 2, as laid out in the report, is $9.3 million. But phase 2 also isn't just an arena, which Brian Orser is. So there's a little bit of apples and oranges in that. It is possible. There is contemplation of recreation facilities going out in and around Lakehead, and one of those contemplations may very well be a field house. And if that is the case, then the phase 2 number, and therefore the city's contribution, would drop somewhat significantly. Not necessarily moving me in any particular direction, just wanted to point that out. And I will ask Councillor Lauer and Madam CAO through you, Mr. Chair, because I think we asked the question, and I don't know if we got a definitive answer. I just don't remember whether RAMA was contemplating putting an application in for the interpretive piece at the Narrows, and so if I could ask that through you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then certainly if Councillor Lauer has anything further to add. The conversation that we had initially with representatives from RAMA was to talk about the project, because they've been very much included in the project for a number of years. And so the definitive request of, are you going to submit an application under this grant opportunity for this project? We didn't ask that specifically at that time. What we wanted to understand, number one, was where our council was with respect to the project. We brought forward a report a few weeks ago, and council certainly believes that this is a worthwhile project. And then this further report to see whether, in fact, council, as part of this grant opportunity, is willing to consider this project. So our next sort of line of discussion with RAMA is, what are you potentially applying for, and is there an opportunity for you to look at this as the project to move forward from your end? So those conversations need to occur.
Councillor Lauer on this.
Sorry, just as a...
Mayor Clark, quickly.
So just as a follow-up, so I'm just wondering if strategically, if we did put our first 2 priorities in and RAMA put in their third, that would still, I understand, count against us, but we would still be within that 2 to 3 threshold for applications, and yet may improve the chances of a couple of different projects being successful. So if there's any feedback on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. We'd have to see how they would view, so if we put ours in as Brian Orser Waterfront and Athley Narrows, and the lead applicant was, say, Ramera, and they put theirs as number one, how that's viewed strategically from, well, one community has it as their number one and one has it as number three. I'm not quite sure how that would mesh.
I would suggest that we would only put our first two priorities in, and Rama would put theirs in.
Just to clarify, though, if we were at all a partner with the Rama one, it would still be counted as one of our applications. So if you're a partner in an application, it counts as one of yours going in.
Okay, so if I may, with a follow-up, I guess what I'm looking for is if we put the third Athley Narrows project in, understanding that we have to prioritize, and they will understand that at the receiving end, what does that do to the potential success of 1 and 2? And that's why I was asking the question about Rama submitting.
Merkley, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. They would still view it that this is our third priority if we did it in the order that's listed there. And that's where I was saying if we were a partner and it's our third, but if one of our partners put it in, it was their one and only or their priority one, how that would be viewed, I guess, would be a ranking system that the province probably has when it involves multiple partners.
On this, and Councillor Lauer, would you like to weigh in as well?
If I may, Mr. Chair, did you pursue with your discussions the fact that the Indigenous funding formula is very different than the municipal funding formula, and would it be that only their portion of the project would be funded under that formula and our portion would be funded under this? We haven't yet reached the point, have we, where we have determined what the economics of that split could or should be in order to accommodate all the needs. And how does it work if it's number one in their list and number three in ours? Is it a contingent kind of thing that if they get it, we have to get it, sort of thing? Or how does that work?
Through Mr. Chair, yeah, I think those are the things we've got to still explore a little bit about how that funding would work if, as you indicated, the percentage that they're eligible for is greater, whether that's for the entire project or for, if they look at it as a shared project, for only for that share of the project. And I do think there's probably some formula that they would look at if it's a partnered one, where it ranks in each of the partners' lists as to how they would rate that.
Councillor Lauer and then Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Councillor Klustra. Just going back to the idea of partnerships, there is absolutely no question that Ramera and Rama First Nations are partners in this project at Atherley Narrows. We formed a committee in 2008, and no one has withdrawn from that committee. They are still active participants in that committee. We, at our end, have run into, as reported a couple weeks ago or last week, whenever it was, we've run into some difficult issues in regard to land claims and environmental and so on and so forth, and has slowed us down. But no one has withdrawn from that committee. So we do have three partners. I'm not sure what Councillor Sapola is referring to, but certainly I can assure everyone here that we have partners.
Okay, Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that to replace Brian Orser, you had a project cost of $10 million. My last recollection is that to just do the arena in phase 2 was somewhere between 17 to 20 million for that 1,000-seat. So what would our city's actual cost be if we only went with the arena? And as Mayor Clark has said, the Lakehead negotiations with the Fieldhouse are continuing. So I'm just wondering, what would our cost be if we just did phase 2 with the arena only?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is part of the reason why I think Phase 2 was ranked to the lower on staff's list, is we don't have those numbers or those breakdowns. It was a very high-level costing that they did when they were doing the design of the original facility that we wanted to make sure from a schematic side they could at least design in where a Phase 2 would go eventually if we pursued that. So the costing that we put there is looking at that high-level costing that we were given back then, knowing the work that we've done on the site now and the issues that we've encountered. So that is sort of a high-level costing. If you were to try to back out, say, just the field house, it would be some proportion of that, but I'm not sure exactly. At the time, it was like a 17 million, 8 million split, but that was several years ago. It was not looking at the specifics of the site. So there was a few things that we kind of factored in there when we gave the overall value.
Supplementary to that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, having talked to some federal people that I know and provincial people that I acquainted with, they're looking at these grants as part of job creation and the benefit to the community and so on. So I'm just wondering, well, by creating Brian Orser, we're not going to create any, renovating Brian Orser, we're not going to create any new jobs, but by doing Phase 2 with the arena and the field house, if it's possible, if Lakehead doesn't do it in the future, then we would be creating additional jobs, and that's going to be a priority. I know that for a fact. So by what we've done here, I think by putting Brian Orser as number one, we're looking at a building that's over 40 years old. Number two, how long is that building going to last? Another 10, 15 years before you have to do more on the outside and that. Second part to Mayor Clark's thing is that if we tear down Brian Orser and build Phase 2, the arena, then we could use Brian Orser's property as an affordable housing thing, which is in desperate need in this community, as we all know. And we really don't have any more property to share with developers that want to create affordable housing. So to me, it's really important that we maybe table this if we haven't got all the information and wait until we get the information next week or whatever it is and deal with it next week. Because I think, no offense to anybody, some of the figures that are in here are not up to what today's reality is. And as Mayor Clark has said, if we go ahead with Lakehead, then all we need is the arena part of it. So if we applied for the arena or Phase 2 as part of the arena with 1,000 seats, then I think it's more economic, makes economic sense than doing Brian Orser or and putting Brian Orser at number 4, because if you're allowed more than 3. So I'm just questioning the figures here, because I don't read them the same way somebody else does here. Because if you look at 17 to 20 million, our share is less than what Brian Orser would bring us, would cost us. So can we redo the figures?
Councillor Heen has been patiently waiting. I'll let her weigh in, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cluster. And I was going back to the Atherley Narrows again. And my question was, in your discussions with the ministry, did they make any indication that if we got the money for it, that RAMA would automatically get the money for it and that RAMERA would automatically get the money? So that if would all 3 partners automatically get the funding, or was there any sort of conversation as to that?
Markley?
Through Mr. Chairman, the application would be viewed as one application, and it would either be successful or not successful, and the funding that would come along with it. The only thing we're not sure of is, because of the different funding formula for an Indigenous application, whether they might be entitled to a little bit more of their share for that, their portion of what it would be.
Okay, I have Councillor Follis next.
Thanks. Through the chair, I actually had a question. This is kind of off the cuff a little bit here, but some other proposals I know had kind of been floated around, but were thought to have some extra complications. One was not Phase 2, but site plan regarding certain outdoor facilities like skate park and that type of thing at the recreation center. property. The other one was Swanmore Hall, which I know was referenced in the report. I just wondered if it might be possible for staff to just speak to that a little bit more. Thanks.
So, Mr. Chairman, certainly it was stressed that the more advanced a project is and the more ready it is to go, the more likelihood for success, and also the more it's supported by current background documentation for that. And so both Foundry Park and the work at Swanmore is still, although maybe needed, or it's going to be down the road a little bit, and we don't have as much of that background and research and that done to date.
Thank you. I have Mayor Clark, and then...
Thank you. I just want to address a comment one of my colleagues made about these numbers in today's reality. I believe these numbers do indeed reflect today's reality. There is a scope in which you're always working on hopefully a lower end that's identified and a higher end that's identified. What we would, the last thing we want is a surprise with a higher number later on. So I think staff have done a good job catching that. The one number that they cannot be overly definitive on, as was mentioned earlier, is we only have concept design for phase 2. So without detailed design, it really is quite difficult to be able to narrow down the actual cost. So I believe and hope this is my last question. My question is, if the items are prioritized applications, could a phase 3 priority beat out a higher priority? If so, how? And if that is possible, is it any merit to considering Rama First Nations putting an application in, because their success would garner 20% more money towards the project, have us as a non-partner, and come in and negotiate with us later on for a contribution? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Mr. Merkley?
Through Mr. Chair, if I understood the question, there's a big component of it about ownership of the asset. And so the lead applicant or the applicant for the funding has to be ultimately the owner of the asset. So there is some question with the Atherley Narrows Bridge Trail Connection Fishweir project, is how that would work with the First Nations as part of that. That's why we may have to be the lead, and that's where the CAO referenced earlier. I think we're going to have to work through that as what is the best way to apply for those funding.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. My question was more just on how we're kind of going about this meeting. Do we have an amendment on the floor at the moment? And if so, are we going to deal with that? I just wasn't sure. I heard Mayor Clark mention a few things, and I wasn't sure if a second for that was one of them. If it was, I think we should move forward and deal with that amendment and then go to the motion.
Councillor Cipolla?
Thank you. After consideration, maybe we just leave the 3 the way they are and add a 4th for phase 2. And I'll leave it up to staff to recommend whether it's just the arena or the arena with the field house once you have all the figures down. But if we could add it rather than delete anything, that might get me a little more support. At least it's on the table, guys. We're dealing with a piece of property that's over 40 years old. Having been in construction of quite a few years, and that I can tell you, you're going to run into problems in a few years. So I'm not sure why we want to double spend our money, but if we can add it to this number 4, I'd appreciate it.
Councillor Eamer.
Mr. Chair, with respect to Councillor Cipolla's suggestion, and I appreciate his flexibility on this, I believe that what we're really talking about is replacement, not addition. That we would be seen less favorably if we go for two attempts to get an ice surface. And if I were the federal government and we put them on and they were within the top 3 priorities or top 4 priorities, I would be saying, well, we're going to support Orillia by taking the lower cost one. Obviously, we'll then be able to use our funding elsewhere for benefit. And so we're certainly, I can't even fantasize a circumstance where we'd get both. And if we really genuinely believe that there is merit to phase 2 over Brian Orser, then the motion should be to amend the motion to replace Brian Orser with phase 2, and not to look like we're over extending on ice surfaces, because that would make 3 of the application actually having ice involved in it. And I'm sure we could find a way to put ice at the Narrows if we worked on it.
If Councillor Eamon is willing to second the motion, I'd glad to replace Brian Orser with the arena. But you're right, it is a replacement. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Merkley, and then do we have an amendment to or do we have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Sepola, and who is the seconder?
I think it's going to second.
Yeah.
To put it on the floor for debate, I will.
I'll let
I will
Mr.
second
Merkley answer first, and then we'll get the amendment.
So, Mr. Chair, I would just add that there is a deadline for the applications on November 12th, and they are pretty significant applications, each one of them. And so we wanted to make sure we didn't do too many where we weren't stretched too thin, to make sure each application wasn't thorough and the best it could be. And I would agree that when you do put in your applications, you are in some ways competing against yourself as well. So item 1 is going to be competing against item 2, item 3, and item 4, because they're going to be looking at, I'm probably certain that we're not going to get all 4 of them. So they would be somewhat competing against each other. So the fewer you have, the less competition within itself and within the overall grant program, and the better job we can do of making sure that the applications are thorough. And
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. Just to be clear, Councillor Sepola, through you to Councillor Sepola, your amendment is to remove Brian Orser Arena and replace it with phase 2, correct?
Correct. I think Councillor Eamon made a good point, and I think staff made a good point that we're competing with ourselves. So again, I would be willing to go with phase 2 without the field house, which would bring down the cost and almost be the same competitive with Brian Orser, and being able to utilize the property that we give up at Brian Orser for affordable housing.
Okay, I'm going to read the amendment moved by Councillor Sepola, second by Mayor Clark, that the motion now before committee be amended by deleting Brian Orser Arena with renovations and inserting Orillia Recreation Center Phase 2 in the number 1 priority ranking. Discussion? Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through Mr. Chair, I will not be supporting this amendment moving forward. I don't even think personally that these numbers are comparable. And when you talk about phase 2 and you talk about Brian Orser Arena, very different values. I will not be supporting it.
Councillor Heen?
Although I would love to see this go forward, can you put together a good proposal for the Brian Orser Arena as far as numbers and drawings and everything else in the time allotted to you?
Through Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so for Brian Orser Arena renovations, we have that background work done. We had EXP do a commissioned study of it. They've sort of listed exactly what it is needs to be accomplished there. We don't have that same level of work for phase 2. So phase 2 would be more of a challenge to try to get that a thorough of application in place.
Councillor Fallis?
Thanks, through the chair. I won't be supporting this. However, I did want to stress to Councillor Sepola that I do appreciate the effort he's putting forward on the affordable housing front, and hopefully I'm certainly amenable to future projects looking at other alternatives. But yeah, on this one, I can't support it for other reasons. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? That's lost. All those in favor on the original motion? As amended, sorry. Oh, sorry, as not amended, sorry. I'll read the original motion again. I need a mover and a seconder for that, which I have right here. Councillor Heen, seconded by Councillor Eamon, that this committee recommends to council that is recommended report PRCD-19-09 dated September 24th, 2019 from the Park, Recreation and Culture Department. Staff be directed to apply to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Community Culture and Recreation through Grants Ontario for the following projects in order of priority: Brian Orser Arena renovations, waterfront park improvements, Athlete Narrows Trail connection, and Fish Weirs Interpretive Center project as part of the multi-purpose category. Do we have any more discussion on this? Not all those in favor? That's carried.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek council approval to enter into a marina management agreement with the Orillia District Chamber of Commerce for the operation of the Port of Orillia for a term of 5 years. Staff met with the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce to review the existing contract and to negotiate a new 5-year contract. In addition, the Chamber sent a letter to the Mayor and Council outlining the following requests: a 1% reduction in the fees paid to the city, an amendment of Section 5, which coincides with legislation regarding the removal of boats. The City of Orillia works closely with the Orillia District Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber understands the economic and tourism opportunities that the Port of Orillia presents to the city. The Chamber is therefore well positioned to provide a welcoming experience to boaters while developing programming and incentives such as the Port Pouch to direct these visitors to the city's downtown core.
Okay, I need a mover and a seconder for the motion. Moved by Mayor Clark, second by Councillor Ainsworth. This committee recommends to council that as recommended in report PRCD-19-10 dated September 24th, 2019 from the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department, the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the marina management agreement for the Port of Orillia with the Orillia District Chamber of Commerce as set out in the Schedule A of the report. Any discussion? Councillor Eamon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting the 5-year extension for the Chamber and the city to for the Chamber to contract with the city the operation of the marina. But I do have a couple of questions about and there's a couple of hypotheses in these questions, so I have to go. Let me try it out, Mr. Chair. If perchance in the report, Ray, you're putting together on the future of that park, you were to come forward and say that we need to somehow manage the boat launch in a different manner, which would require staff to be present, maybe charge a fee for that. If we were to put the skate park in, which, I mean, it's in our budget, we might win the grant. It could be in 5 years that would be there. Does that mean the chamber then is responsible for managing the skate park as a feature that's operating out of that building and as a feature that is attracting people in the same way? I mean, the consequences, it attracts people, not the same way the marina does. And thirdly, which isn't quite as skeptical or quite as hypothetical, is the chamber submitted a list of desired contributions they'd like the city to make, one of which was the management of the water, the port, in terms of dredging, in terms of weed control and things of this nature. And there were some pretty significant estimates of annual costs that might be involved in that. And I don't understand whether those costs, say for the weed control, are going to be part of the chamber's costs of operation, or whether the expectation is purely that the city would be picking up those costs, which are necessary, I believe, in order to create navigable waters. years. I do believe we do the dredging periodically at the end of the pipes, and that doesn't even talk about the investment we're going to have to make in stormwater containment and things of that nature in the future. So it strikes me that the narrowness of the report is fine, and the management we get from the chamber is excellent, and I'm quite pleased with that, but I'm just wondering where these other things could fit if they in fact come about, and whether the contract can be open for negotiation, or whether we're going to be picking up all of the burden on all of that stuff.
Mr. Merkley?
Through Mr. Chair, I think in order of your questions, the first one about the launch ramp, certainly if there was, moving down the road, there was a thought of having them, say, staff it or manage that process, then I think that would probably be renegotiated as part of the agreement. The second question on the skate trail, it's outside the operating period of the chamber of the building. So they only go from May till Thanksgiving. The skate trail would be outside that, so it would be back to us, and that's part of our operation. The third one is the agreement is based on the existing way it works. So they look after the weed harvesting at this point. That would not preclude them in the future of still bringing forward ideas or suggestions or changes, one of which is the EAC is working through that process of what would be the best, or what is approach for the weed issue at the port. So that may come back depending on what the recommendations from EAC or what the conclusions from EAC are, and that would again have to be reshaped in the agreement if there's a change in the way we currently operate or currently do the weed process.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I had a constituent approach me about the possibility of renting a number of slips in the marina at a future time, and I'm wondering if I could have a comment about the possibility or feasibility of that happening.
Through Mr. Chairman, certainly the issue of seasonal slips comes up from time to time. It is a transient marina. That's the whole focus of it right now, is just being in the transient population for the Trent Severn and attracting people to Orillia to shop and visit our downtown core. That is one thing that we've asked the consultant to look at, who's doing the waterfront design plan, to make a comment on that. There are some things that are happening down there now. You'll notice the new fishing pier is being constructed just by the launch ramp there, and it'll be floated over into place soon. They'll remove the old fishing pier, so it should give some more space there down the road if we want to do more docking that maybe could accommodate seasonal. That might be a possibility, but currently it is transient, and we'll await comment in the design plan process that we're going through for the waterfront area as to their comments on seasonal slips.
Thank you. Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally support the Chamber with this 5-year contract. I do not support the 1% reduction. I think they can make up the loss by increasing the rates a little bit. They are transient boaters. We have one of the, well, as they call Jewel of the Severn thing, and there's no reason why we can't increase the rates there, and they can't increase the rates to accommodate that 1%. So I'd be willing to put an amendment on the table to delete that 1% reduction from the report.
Ms. Merkley.
Just to speak on the that issue, certainly when we did the last agreement was the first one of the new building and the new lay of the land, so to speak, as to who was looking after what and how we were going to break down the percentages. Before this, it was totally different, and we ended up sharing things like half of the gull control or half of the weed harvesting. We've now shifted all those expenses to them, and in doing so in the last agreement, we kind of said, okay, this is the first agreement under these new conditions. We'll revisit that at the end of the term, and we'll see where we stand and see if it's fair, and it could have been adjusted more our way, more their way. Certainly, we felt from a staff perspective that this seemed like a reasonable request, in that one of the areas where they're picking up more costs is the maintenance of the facility between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, where we're putting our programming in that space. So we were down there for the hydro announcement there. It would be their staff that were cleaning up that facility and doing the maintenance related to that. We're running fitness and lifestyle programming in there. It's their staff that's looking after that right up until Thanksgiving. So it did seem like a reasonable request in our opinions based on this is the first go round, but I think this would now sort of set the parameter now that we see how things are working.
Supplementary, if I may. We have some of the lower rates for boating in our marina part of it. So I see no problem in them increasing the rate to accommodate that 1%. I really don't. And I'm not disagreeing with you that they do a great job of cleaning up after we use it or whatever. But I think the 1% reduction is not beneficial to the taxpayers of this community for a transient marina. So I would, if somebody would help me second it, I would ask that we eliminate that 1% and give them the opportunity to increase the rates.
Councillor Fola, I believe Councillor Ainsworth has seconded your amendment? No? Okay. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Spola? Not seeing one, so Mayor Clark, you're next.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Klustra. Listen, I just want to say, and I know the executive director of the chamber is in our vast audience today, but I would want to say just before I make a comment, a question, is the energy and the attitude that has been breathed into what was already a very good partnership before, and the chamber has always been a wonderful institution, but has been breathed in by the president or the new executive director and by their Dean Beers, the president, and to say Monsieur Lafontaine, is really is terrific. It is reflected in the staff down there. It's reflected in the energy at the port. And it's reflected in the programming. The only issue I really have is they make me get wet way too often. But I haven't learned to master a sword like Monsieur Lafontaine has, so I end up wet every year. But getting wet and with the cardboard boat race, those of us that do it can attest. Visually, as you walk along the boardwalk, you can see the weeds that were being referred to, and when you get in there, it's interesting swimming. Not that that's a good swimming area with the amount of weeds. So I truly do look for a meaningful solution to the, hopefully a joint solution to the weed issue, and I know EAC is contemplating that right now, and I'm not sure if there's much of an update. I understand there may not be, but if Councillor Lauer could just maybe speak to that briefly, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Lauer?
This is going to be really brief. I'll just pass it over to Marcia. I think she's well informed.
Ms. Russell.
Sorry, through you, could you repeat the question?
Just curious, seriously looking forward to a meaningful joint solution between the city and the chamber with other diminishing or eradicating the weed issue. I understand our new stormwater action plan at some point will mitigate some of the sediment issue, and I think some of the weed issue, by extension, if I'm not mistaken. But until then, and maybe even then, the weeds are a significant issue, not just for those who get thrown out of a boat early in a cardboard boat race, but for the props of boats, etc. So I understand that maybe before EAC right now, so I'm just curious what if there's been any action or when we might expect some sort of recommendation.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We have been working with EAC on this. We have a number of questions that we are responding to and have been lining a meeting with Lakehead University in order to review with them as well. We've also included in this the Dougal Canal as well. They've been part of this, and we've had a number of presentations that have been done to bring people up to speed, but it has also left them with a significant amount of questions. So we are approaching different levels of government as there is some research that is being done. We're trying to get a hold of some of that. So we're kind of working through some of those. I would anticipate that hopefully mid next year we would have some answers to that. In terms of the weed management overall, I think Mr. Lafontaine has made it pretty clear that, knowing that they have a longer term an agreement in place does allow them to maybe start putting plans into place to look at different capital expenditures to help with the weed challenges that they are experiencing out there. So it is something that overall the city, we're working alongside the chamber with this, and hopefully we'll be able to work through that.
Through you to Ms. Russell, thank you. Sorry, and a big thank you to Councillor Lauer for facilitating that conversation.
Councillor Ainsworth and then Councillor Campbell.
Mr. Chair, just to make my comments quick, I definitely was not supporting that amendment. I wanted to make a point. I'm just happy to support the motion as is.
Yeah, okay, Councillor Campbell, yeah, go ahead, and then Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I'll try not to get into the weeds the way Mayor Clark did there.
Oh.
Oh, come on. 3 years ago when this, I think it was 3 years ago when this was discussed, I have to admit I was a couch counselor at the time at home watching this and going, come on, you really need to, the city should be taking over the running of the port. It just makes sense. Since then, a lot of research, and as Mayor Clark said, just the enthusiasm of Alan LaFontaine is contagious. He made me walk the plank as well. I mean, what he's bringing to the port is amazing. The enthusiasm and the new ideas that he's trying and the number of people that are coming down there. So I have no problem supporting this whatsoever. Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to return to the weed issue for a moment and just inform my colleagues. Councillor Campbell and I attended the annual general meeting of the Dougal Canal last week, and it was alluded to the fact that the third year of their management of the weed problem there and the research that Lakehead has done on all 3 years has significantly reduced and eliminated in many parts of the canal the invasive weeds, and that the return of the native species to the canal is quite spectacular in terms of that aspect. There are still some phosphorus issues that are having to be dealt with, but those are systemic, and we're investing a lot in our liquid waste disposal facility to address part of that issue, and the management board will continue to do that. But there is a living demonstration project going on in this city with scientific support for it in terms of the impact of the strategies that have been used that I think can guide us and guide the chamber as we go forward. So and I know that EAC is familiar with that in terms of their access to those information. So it'll be interesting to see as we unfold.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll call the question on the motion here. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And we'll move on to the Chief Administration Officer Tourism Visitor Wayfinding Signage Program. Mr. Ladouceur and Ms. Ruff. Staff may proceed.
Thank you. To members of Council Committee, the purpose of the report is to seek direction from Council with regards to digital displays versus non-digital displays as a component within the secondary entrance signs. The need for a comprehensive wayfinding signage program was identified in 2017, and a tourism visitor wayfinding signage program was started. Phase 1 has been completed, which is the RTO7 vehicular directional signage. Phase 2 involves the downtown directional signage, which is anticipated to be complete in 2020. And Phase 3 involves the replacement of 5 secondary entrance signs. So in order to provide continuity across the secondary entrance signs and the downtown, a graphic design company was hired to provide a strategy and concepts for the signage. Habit Creations, a marketing agency specializing in environmental design, was awarded the graphic design contract. Several factors should be considered when determining the size and type of secondary entrance signs. For example, 2 versus 4 lane traffic, road usage from residential to tourists, and integration with the Highway 11 gateway signs. Based on these factors, a hybrid of digital display and non-digital display entrance ordinances have been recommended by Habit Creations, and it is recommended to really install digital display signs along Highway 12 on Coldwater Road and on Athley Road, with non-digital display signs on Memorial Avenue, Lackley Street, and Oldbury Road. Cost implications of installing the digital signs will be reported during the 2020 budget process, should direction be given, and at this time, staff is seeking direction to determine if specifications and renderings should be sought out from Habit. At this time, I welcome any questions Council Committee may have.
Let's wait for the motion. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the motion, please? Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, seconded by Councillor Emond. This committee recommends to Council that as recommended in report CCTD-19-08 dated September 24th, 2019 from the Chief Administration Office, 2 digital and 3 non-digital secondary entrance signs for Phase 3A of the Tourism Visitor Wayfinding Signage Program be supported in principle as set out in Schedule A of the report, and that the cost implications of installing the digital signs be referred to the 2020 budget deliberations. Discussion? Councillor Ainsworth?
Through you, Mr. Chair, happy to support this at this point in time. As it says in the motion, this will be something that comes to budget for deliberation. And then I think that's where we can have a more fulsome discussion whether or not then we can compare it to other things that are going on during the budget cycle.
Okay. Councillor Lauer?
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I'm sorry, I missed who did the design?
Through Mr. Chair, Habit Creations.
Habit, okay. So, anyway, I would congratulate them on their choice. I'm really appreciative of the fact that they picked up on the red brickness of Orillia. I think that's a significant thing to recognize. And I like these. I like them a lot. And I hope that when we do the highway signs, that we incorporate that same idea and that Orillia is a red brick limestone community.
Ms. Ruff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we are actually coming forward with that highway design to complement and look exactly like the secondary entrance signs proposed here, but on a larger scale.
Councillor Cipolla?
Thank you, through you to our staff. Can you just go over where the digital signs, you and I have had this conversation, the digital signs on the highway and on why not on Lackley and Memorial, which the tourists come in and we could have a digital sign telling them what's the events are happening in our community, and that during budget, can we amend this to include those be digital signs to outline what the events are in our city?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the strategy provided by Habit took into consideration the Highway 11 gateway signs. So in terms of looking at an overall footprint into Orillia, Memorial Avenue, Lackley, often those visitors coming to town will have gone onto those exits via Highway 11. So it would just be double messaging. So in terms of cost effectiveness, and then aside from that, the roadway allowances and the shoulder space on those roads don't really merit to have that size of the sign. So the digital display signs are about 18 feet high, so they are fairly large compared to 11 feet high non-digital displays. So taking into account two-lane versus four-lane traffic, and then integrating with the Highway 11 signage, their strategy was to just use the 2.
So Highway 11 coming north, are you saying it'll have a large digital sign if we can possibly do it?
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that request will be coming forward as part of the 2020 budget. It was in the 10-year capital plan and is coming forward this year for a request for entrance signage to the highway.
If I may, going to Barrie on Mapleview, we have one of the local sign producers that has created digital signs through Pattison and all that. I know we can't single source, but I mean, every other community is doing these large digital signs on their entrance and everything else so that they can promote people coming to our community and what the events are, whether it's putting the mayor in the water or whatever. But I think that's so important that we get on with the digital stuff that's happening within the world, within the technical world. Technology is enhanced in the way it is. So I think it's really important. So I hope we can bring this up during budget.
Mayor Clark on this?
Well, I was just going to say, I think I understand Council Cipolla's passion for this, but that is indeed a discussion for when it's brought forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Follis and Councillor Emond.
Thanks. Through the chair, this is something certainly I see the positives and the negatives to this. I was wondering, I had a couple questions. The first was in regards to what was the location of the two digital signs anticipated to be? I know you said it, but I just wanted to get those again if it's possible.
Through Mr. Chair, the one is on Atherley Road coming into Orillia from that direction, and then the other one is on Highway 12 Coldwater, basically outside the retail outlets right there.
Just a quick supplemental as well. I wondered if you might be able to speak to the safety element of it, because I know sometimes with digital signs that can be a concern. My understanding is there are certain restrictions that we'd have to be compliant to. So I just wondered if you could speak to that. Thanks.
Through Mr. Chair, Habit Creations, our environmental signage experts, so as part of their strategy, that was one of the reasons why they recommended those two locations due to the 4-lane of traffic and the amount of space. In terms of other factors, there would be an permit application to MTO for the location on Highway 12, as it is within a certain amount of feet and meters towards a provincially monitored highway.
And sorry, quick supplemental as well, and the frequency to which the sign changes is also monitored, is my understanding?
Through Mr. Chair, certainly, yes, that MTO permit does have a standard for how quickly a sign can change, so we would follow all those recommendations or those rules.
Okay, Councillor Emond.
Thank you. If I read this appropriately, we are agreeing that we should do this, and that all we're doing is referring the funding of it to budget, which is appropriate, as opposed to trying to fund it today. So we're not in any way delaying. In fact, we're accelerating because it allows staff to bring to budget the details we need. So just in case, Councillor Sepulveda, you were, because I know you were advocating for it, but it's here. That's what we're doing.
Oh, I realize that. Thank you.
Through Mr. Chair, so staff is looking for direction from council in terms of to support in principle. The idea is that Habit Creations is currently in their process, and their final deliverable is a tender-ready package. So based off council's direction, that we can have the specifications and renderings for both concepts to be able to go to market. So if council at budget chooses to only go non-digital, then we have that package ready to go. And if they choose to do the hybrid mix, well, then we have both specs ready. If council go one direction, well, then we may not have the other set of specifications ready from the Habit.
Any other questions from members of council? Mayor Clark? Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It was the Highway 11 signs, I think, Councillor Sepulveda was referencing. I think it was something I suggested we should put off on discussion. But number two, I just want to remind one of our colleagues, we have Rotary, so we have digital signs now at Rotary Place, and I think a more comprehensive one coming to the rec center on West Street, which is a busy 4-lane artery as well. I have a comment. I'm probably in support of this. I love the design of the signs. I'm just wondering if digital fits the image that we want at in our branding at the entrance to the city. So I throw it out there as a something to ponder, but I'm probably not bent one way or another. I understand the benefit that it would bring in terms of information. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, wait for Councillor Lauer to sit down, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I'll move on to the last item, Clerk's Department Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report before you provides an overview of the province's new legislative requirements under the current Police Services Act, mandating municipalities to develop a community safety and well-being plan by January 1st, 2021. Developing a plan of this nature involves taking a multi-sectoral approach to service delivery to proactively implement strategies that address local priorities related to crime and complex social issues. The goal is to achieve a community where everyone is safe, has access to services and where individuals and families are able to meet their needs for education and healthcare, food and housing, income, and social and cultural expression. It is recommended that Orillia participate in a collaborative initiative with the townships of Oro-Medonte, Ramera, and Severn under the County of Simcoe's leadership to develop a joint plan. The county has committed resources to oversee the joint plan's development, and there are no financial implications for the city resulting from this proposed recommendation. The county simply requests that Orillia and OPP representatives be appointed to a geographical municipal coordinating committee to review and monitor the plan's progress. Thank you.
I just need a mover and seconder for the motion. By Councillor Campbell, second by Mayor Clark. This committee recommends to council that is recommended report CD-19-13 dated September 11th, 2019 from the Clerk's Department, Community Safety and Wellbeing be included as a priority in the City of Orillia's 2018 to 2022 strategic plan, and that the City of Orillia participate in a collaborative initiative with the townships of Oro-Medonte, Ramera, and Severn under the County of Simcoe's leadership to develop a joint community safety and well-being plan in accordance with the new legislative amendments outlined under Part 11, Section 143 of the current Police Services Act, RSO 1990, Clause page 15, and that the following be appointed to the Geographical Municipal Coordinating Committee to assist with the development of the Joint Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Assistant Clerk, Executive Director to the Orillia Police Services Board, Orillia OPP Detachment Commander or Designate. Any questions? Councillor Lauer?
Thank you, Councillor Klustra, through you. Why is First Nations, Rama First Nations not included in our group?
Through you, Mr. Chair, according to the Police Services Act, First Nations are not required to prepare a community safety and well-being plan.
Oh, okay.
However, the ministry encourages them to participate in any consultative process.
Yeah, okay, so they'll be a part of the consultation, just not part of the actual committee. Second, if I could, Councillor Klustra. So I've tried to get my head around this, what it all means, and I have to admit to being a little bit suspicious of the motives here. Is there any funding attached to any of these things? Like when we go through this whole process and come up with marvelous solutions that might include new services and so on and so forth, is the municipality expected to fund this completely, or is the province making some sort of offer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the ministry has confirmed that there are no dedicated funds available for communities to develop their plans. So any strategies that are potentially going to be implemented will have to come to the budget table for discussion and analysis. The ministry is encouraging municipalities to collaborate with and leverage existing resources, which is partly the reason why we're partnering with the county, since we have shared resources.
Thank you.
Hey, Madam CEO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to augment what Ms. Preston indicated, I think it should be certainly top of mind for members of council as this type of project does move forward, and the recommendations that do evolve as a result of it. Ms. Preston was very clear to indicate that there were no financial implications as a result of the recommendation within this report. But as this report or as this study does move forward, there will be a series of recommendations that will have to be considered by council in terms of potential cost implications.
Thank you. Councillor Raymond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was a wee bit disappointed in that the orientation is, at least I read it, was more on the safety and security side of the equation, driven out of the police service part of this, as opposed to the community well-being, which is very much at the heart of what is happening in the healthcare reform that's going on. And I do see here that the recommendation is that a member of the North Simcoe Muskoka Lynn would be a participant. Well, the North Simcoe Muskoka Lynn no longer exists as a policy-making body. It's purely in place as an administrative body to deliver the funding until the alternative evolves. And that alternative, as you know from the reports I've brought at least the last time, is that the local health team will be that vehicle going forward. But my assumption is that we can influence that. I'm just wondering on what I have found at the health table is that the participation of the municipal political leadership that Mayor Clark and I bring to that has been meaningful in that it has shifted. I'm not sure shifted. It has added certainly the well-being component as opposed to the clinical health component, where we're outweighed about 40 to 1 when we get to the table. And in this case, I'm wondering if we should not be considering, not in any way, a statement about the Assistant Clerk Executive Director nor the OPP Detachment Commander's contribution, because I think it's essential, but whether we should be considering putting a member of council's name forward to participate in this exercise. I saw that was one of the individuals or one of the areas that could be represented to ensure that that sensitivity is brought to the table and we don't end up just with a group of technical people, all of whom are skilled and capable, but those who are not. And the value I've seen on the health side has been significant, not just from our politicians, but the county politicians are supporting this, the township politicians as well on the health side. So,
Preston?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, my appointment as well as the OPP Detachment Commander's appointment, should Council adopt option 1, would be for the Geographical Municipal Coordinating Committee, which is different from the Advisory Committee. The GMCC would essentially just oversee the plan's milestones, so the Advisory Committee would report back to us. But the Advisory Committee is primarily geared towards municipal administration. The Advisory Committee, there is an opportunity for a member of Council to serve on that. So in due course, I believe, again, if Council adopts option 1, then correspondence will come forward from the county to be received at the Council table. And at that point in time, then Council will have an opportunity to appoint a councillor if they so desire.
Okay, any other questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to inquiries. Councillor Follis will like to introduce his inquiry.
Thanks. I'll just speak to it very briefly. So this is looking into the viability and implications of putting an accessible path between Monarch Drive and Atlantis Drive. There's a small strip of city-owned property at the kind of the top corner of Monarch as it bends around. There were a couple of reasons that I was wanting to pursue this, just get more information. One being there's recent changes to busing for students of Notre Dame that live in West Ridge. According to the school board and others, there's been some changes. So basically, what has happened is any student of Notre Dame in West Ridge no longer is able to take the bus, that there are other transportation methods that need to be pursued. One of the options, of course, is for students to walk up to Notre Dame. And so this could potentially solve some of the problems around that. There is the paths through the Westridge Park there, close by. However, there's some complexities with using that. It's not accessible to everyone for those using wheelchairs or have difficulties walking. The other difficulty, as well as safety, it's it's away from the road, and so certainly there's concerns around that as well. The last thing I thought I'd leave people with is I would certainly encourage staff to look at environmentally friendly options in terms of the sidewalk. Certainly it'd be great to get, if this is voted forward, just to get a couple of different options in terms of what might be practical there. But yeah, I hope everyone will support this motion. Thanks.
Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we just need a little bit of clarification with respect to this inquiry so that I know whether I'm asking PRC, DSE, or ESO to actually do the report. This is a utility easement that is meant not necessarily for pedestrian access. So if I may ask through you to the councillor requesting the information, what exactly are we looking for in terms of an accessible? Are you looking for a sidewalk? Are you looking for a trail? Are you looking, what exactly are we looking for so that I know which department actually can report on this matter?
Councillor Follis?
It's a good question. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but I think it might be a sidewalk if we need to ensure the accessibility element. But of course, I would pass that over to senior staff to make a recommendation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, through you, and I know this isn't the opportunity to debate the issue, but we do need to understand sort of where we're going with this. If it is a sidewalk, then there is a policy that council has adopted with respect to how we actually move forward with the installation of sidewalks. So again, if that's where we're heading, then it should go through the policy process.
Councillor Follis?
What I would say to that is certainly with this particular inquiry, I would kind of look for direction on if we were to vote this forward, what types of protocol might we pursue? This is just simply getting the information. That's the intention.
Okay, Councillor Ainsworth?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, what I might recommend to Councillor Falls, I think this is definitely something that's important within the community and specifically within Westridge. I think maybe a report to council in the future with some consultation with staff, specifically as Madam CEO has mentioned, there are certain policies in place for sidewalks and things, and maybe more of a discussion about, what our potential options are if we wanted to move that forward a little bit faster or things along those lines, and then come back to the table, to prevent this from being defeated as it's not on the floor currently.
Councillor Eamon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether my thought is the same one as Councillor Ainsworth, but I was going to suggest that Councillor Follis withdraw this request, meet with staff, and clarify the options that he can put into a inquiry of this nature prior to bringing it to the table, because it's obvious from what we're hearing from the CAO is that we can go this way or this way, but the staff needs to know from the councillor and from and maybe the two councillors from out there who have knowledge of what's going on, what direction you want to go. And it would be more productive to have the precision of the inquiry decided before we debate the issue of whether we should have it or not.
Councillor Follis?
Through the chair, I'm certainly open to doing that. If that's it sounds like that's the will of council and the CAO as well, and bring it back to the table as soon as possible with some further details included. Thanks.
So we'll just withdraw your inquiry to a future date. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to announcements. Councillor Campbell and then Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Councillor Cloustra. I just wanted to pass on my congratulations to the Sustainable Orillia people for the electric vehicle event this past weekend at the Orillia Square Mall. My wife and I were fortunate enough to drive a BMW i3 and a Tesla Model 3. Unfortunately, my wife absolutely fell in love with the Tesla Model 3 and probably as we speak is figuring out financing.
Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to pass on a congratulatory his leadership in the climate change walk that we had recently, especially Mayor Clark and Daniel. Excellent turnout, and your comments, Mayor Clark, were encouraging both to me and to a lot of the citizens that were there. And just ask one favor, that you can, if you want to contact Barry Docs, which are doctors, and see if we can have the presentation that they made at the symposium at City Council to be made here at our council. It was really well done, but I just want to take this time to congratulate you and Daniel on the leadership that you're showing towards climate change.
I have Councillor Heen first, but Mayor Clark, go ahead. Okay, Councillor Heen.
Well, I would just like to congratulate Councillor Ainsworth on his upcoming marriage on Saturday.
Yes.
And
He as well. Pray for sunshine.
and to wish him all the best. And I know that he and Renee have spent many hours preparing for this day, and I'm sure that all of council wish you much happiness in the years to come.
Mayor Clark.
Thank you. I know it's been referenced earlier, but I do want to say just what a wonderful event it was. Actually, two events. On Friday, I attended a symposium that Councillor Iman was referencing with respect to the development of a Ontario Health, a local Ontario Health team framework, and the energy in the room was terrific, and the willingness to work together with so many different agencies may very well bring about hopefully a meaningful alternative delivery system for healthcare and preventative healthcare in this region. But I had to leave it for about an hour and a half, 2 hours on Friday because we'd heard that there were about 50 to 60 student protesters and maybe some others coming to City Hall, and I wanted to be here to engage them on the Climate Action Day. And of course, when I got here, the numbers were quite overwhelming, wonderfully overwhelming. There was somewhere between 350 and 400 people doing a wonderfully peaceful protest, but chanting and getting their point across. I know a couple of us on council joined the march. I think it was Councillor Follis, Councillor Heen, and Councillor Sapola. And it really was a wonderful event. It was it's a passion and energy that we have to bottle and take advantage of and put these folks to work. We were able to highlight some of the initiatives that the city is taking, and for some of those initiatives and for the organization that staff did kind of at the last minute, Madam CAO, I will send a memo to those staff. They brought some very good organization and set up a framework where we were able to engage the input of many of the citizens that were there. And on the heels of that, our Environmental Advisory Committee had put together a 150 tree giveaway in the city parking lot the next day, and I believe all those trees were gone in short order. And the feedback from the people who received those, and even those who didn't show up, just thought it was just a wonderfully well-timed event. And like Councillor Campbell, I did attend the electric vehicle display and demonstration up at the mall, which we did with in Severn Township, an example of our partnership. And I had Mayor Harry Hughes was there and Mayor Paquette as well. But there were about 30 electric vehicles. It was really an opportunity to experience that in which I think is relatively rare to have that critical mass of so many different vehicles there. Many were test driven, and on Saturday and Sunday, hundreds of people went through the thing. So just a hats off to EAC for their tree giveaway and to Sustainable Orillia for the event on the weekend. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Open public forum. Any members of the public wish to come to the microphone and express their concerns? I don't see anybody running down. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved by Councillor Ainsworth, second by Councillor Heen. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.